All right, we are recording. Just finishing saying hello to people, ready to seek the truth. That's awesome. Yeah, the biggest question that I referred to in the post is just about how do we know what's true, and also what I set up last time in Alchemy 29 about the vision, right? That beautiful vision of what if you felt that you could calmly, confidently, competently, inevitably, properly approach questions, go from questions to an answer. It means you could ask virtually anything, right? And then calmly and confidently and most effectively proceed toward getting that result, right? Because any result can be reframed as a question, right? Life is one big game of Jeopardy, I suppose. But that's a beautiful vision. So they all kind of come down together. It's the same thing about how do I know what's true? How do I answer questions? But in this kind of alchemy way, what is it that I'm talking about? About having this sense of almost perfect or fully perfect calm, confidence, competence in approaching questions, and how amazing that vision would be, because then all we'd have to do is come up with questions or discover questions and then go from there, right? We would have already won if we come up with the right question, if we then know if it's inevitable after that, right? So what a crazy way to live life is if you win just by coming up with questions and you feel it and then you live it, right? Sean, I haven't been able to listen to 28 and 29 Alchemy yet. I feel outdated. You're obsolete, Sean. We're going to have to replace you with a new model soon. But we'll do it right now. So we're going into the last one, but I am absolutely here to win. This is a really, really bad place to be if you're a bad idea. We're going to finish up with the absolute nuke against those pesky little things. Or if you're a good idea and want to be found, then this is the place to be. So I'm here to win. I think that for a lot of you, this will be an extra real major pop where tonight might be the night where you can say absolutely that day, what day is today, September 19th, I won. And then from then on, I was just on the attack, but I'd already won. It was already inevitable starting tonight. So let's go for that. And I think we got it. As I said, the kind of final, I think that the way that I'm going to present it to you guys today, it's going to be familiar in a lot of ways, but it might be totally new in a lot of ways too, in some way. But it really felt itself in for me in a way that, and you can't force it, right? As we'll see. But I could always have talked about something useful and explained again about how to know what's true today. But I think what I have for you is going to be particularly hard-hitting, at least over time. It's not about that I'm going to reveal the first slide and all of a sudden you'll fall out of your chair or not. But I'm telling you, this is absolutely positively, I'm dead sure, totally clear. This is the place to look. You just look in where I'm about to show you, and that's it. That's all you're going to have to know. And of course, all the rest is just details. There's plenty of useful details at that point that I've filled in and that other people can fill in and that you can discover and fill in yourself. But I'm going to show you the only place you have to look, and then it's going to you're just going to win as you understand that. Mike says the 29th out of 30th. I've attended live. It's been incredible. You're very welcome, Mike, and thank you so much for your support, as Bartles and James used to say. But thank you, Mike, and the hints and the questions and the ingredients that you've given me over the last few days have really helped. Been part of things coming together. Brian wrote, it came together yesterday. I watched 4 of Greg Morrison's videos, and I understood 95% of what he was talking about. At that moment, I knew I'd been building Will Never Beg Again. Yeah, that's great, and more of those came out today. That's right. All right. It's Judgment Day for bad ideas. That's awesome. I'll drop the nuclear bomb against nonsense. I love it, Sean. That's terrific. All right. The comments are flowing. Okay. Yep, that's right, Sebastian. The grand finale has come. It's about to come, at least. And hey, Joseph, how you doing? And Rick and everyone, you're very welcome, Joe Antoinette and John. All right, let's do it. Let's go to slide number 1. All right. So the only place you're ever going to have to look is at this concept. All right. I've said things like this before, but I realized that I hadn't isolated it and clarified it in a way where you know to just look here and everything else will fall into place. And I think the way I'll elaborate on it today, even if some of the examples I'll use might be familiar, but that's all right. That's actually great, right? Because that means we've set the stage well. What we're going to, all you need to do is you need to go along with me here, and look at the consequences. Look at how it all works. If you're seeking, if the goal becomes for best fit, all right, conceptually, whatever, fitting things into the best. And as soon as once we walk through what that process would look like and where it'll lead, and the benefits and the drawbacks, and then I'm going to contrast that with what if you go for matching, all right? And that in doing that, once you see and live that distinction, as soon as you see it, you'll live it. You won't be tempted. And well, either as soon as you see it, or it'll very quickly spiral to a point where what was it that I wrote? Let me just pick around here. Dum-da-dum. Here. One of the other things is this is something I want to develop, and it might turn into a series or something, but and one way or the other, there's something about unconflicted thinking. I don't know what the best word for the word thinking is there, but there's something about unconflicted thinking or action or something that is like it's both kind of overtly what our minds are always going for, either by default or what we really want. But what we're going to see is there's two routes to getting there. There's two routes to getting to unconflicted thinking. Everyone wants unconflicted thinking, even your mind in its own way. It's not conscious, but the way that whatever that substitute for want is. It all wants to be unconflicted. Right? It doesn't want to try to go in two ways at once, right? And if it does, then it doesn't like it. It gives you a sense of emotional wrongness or pain, and it tries to resolve that one way or the other. But there's also a real true power to unconflicted thinking. But as I said, as we're going to see, there's two ways to get there, and one, you don't really get there. One, you basically kind of fake it, and there's an overlap where sometimes it'll work, but other times it won't. But it's the only way. It's the best fit way. It's the only way generally the brain knows by default. And we're surrounded by it to the point where even when we do matching, and people do, without alchemy, people will do some matching, but it'll, like I've talked about before, where people can kind of operate consciously like within a box, but there's a way that they don't get all out and out and out until they get to a foundation, right? And that's everything I've been saying is about what I'm talking about today. But putting it in this way should drive the final nail into the coffin for anyone that hasn't already gotten there. And it doesn't mean it has to happen this moment, by the way. As always, it'll fill itself in. It doesn't have, you don't have to force it. And it's just this, everything's the same iteration of this. What I'm saying, even just what I said, is another example of this best fit versus matching. You don't need to revert to best fit just to feel like you got it tonight. But this will do it for you. I'm overwhelmingly confident. I don't mean this webinar right now necessarily, although for many it might, or even will. But just looking in this place, I'll take care of it for you. But what's going to happen is slowly, quickly, I'm not sure, but inevitably, seeking matching, which is the right way to do things in essence, or consciously, will end up feeling like it's the better and easier path to unconflicted thinking. Like basically both you and your mind both want unconflicted thinking. You both, like you love it when you just feel like you know exactly what to do, you know what you want, you know how to get there, etc. Right? Flow. Right? Everyone wants it all the time for good reason. But to the mind, the only option is basically best fit, typically, to get there. So it's always going in and out of that. And even when it supposedly gets there, the power is very diluted in most every case, except in like kind of rare cases that are sometimes reported by people that maybe we've hit in our life here and there, but very rarely. And we don't know how to get back to it. But I understand that a way to explain what happened to me at some point was that what I call seeking understanding, but it's the seeking matching. Same thing that I've been trying to say. I hit a point where it felt even like it became or I was basically unconflicted about it being the easier and better path constantly to getting to what we all want all the time, which is to feel like we know how to move forward, right? To feel confident, to feel like, we always have to make decisions, right, and then do stuff. And so obviously whenever we do stuff and think stuff, we want to feel like we're thinking the right thing and doing the right thing, right? And then the more we feel that way, the more we're motivated to do it, right? The more it's connected up with stuff we want, the more clarity it feels like we have, the more understanding it feels like we have. So we always want unconflicted thinking. Like in essence, we and our mind are in simpatica. We're not in conflict ultimately. That we want unconflicted thinking, but the wrong path constantly seems like the right path nonstop. But what we can do is get on an upward spiral and then get over a hump in practice where it's going to seem easier and better automatically to go for matching, and then it's game over. You're not going to go back, and that's when life gets doubly or exponentially easier, because now it's easy to do the method that makes everything easier and that's more effective, and then you're in incredible shape. Okay, let's get back to the first slide here. So we're addressing the issue of how do you know how to know what's true. When I've talked about scenarios, when I've talked about stipulating, when I've talked about mismatching, the law of non-contradiction, and to the extent that when I've talked about those things, it's been a little bit like, okay, I get it to some degree, but I also feel like I don't quite get it. It's because those things don't really make a lot of sense in the best fit model. Everything kind of, or a lot of things, feel differently and wrong, and the sense of what's important, especially related to what's about thinking, and the importance of it, of thinking accurately and so forth. It's all, it's not even exactly even the opposite, but it's upside down a lot. So once you realize that the whole point is we're trying to seek matching and how that works and why, then it'll easily make sense about using scenarios, stipulating, mismatching, law of non-contradiction, and so forth. It's just when we don't realize that this is what I'm talking about fundamentally that then the details of those things don't seem to fit totally. Like they sort of fit and sort of don't, in essence. Or you kind of waffle back and forth, or and that can end as we elaborate on this. And this also addresses the same. It boils down to the similar question: how do you go about most efficiently, effectively, calmly, and competently answering any question, solving any problem? All right, and then I wrote, your brain will default to seeking best fit until and unless you guide it to seek matching. And what does that look like? And then I want you to understand the overlap. The overlap between best fit and matching is why people don't just slam into walls and they can't, they just sit around picking their nose and they can't feed themselves. People can, right? People do all sorts of things competently. And so something about our fundamental model here needs to take that into account, right? If I were to show you something that concludes that people are all morons nonstop, then that wouldn't jive with what obviously is correct, which is that they're not, right? So this will also make sense out of how people are very smart often, and then how those same people just seem to lose it completely. I don't mean lose their temper, but just lose their marbles, right, and come up with crazy stuff. And yourself, right? Like when you wonder, well, how have I done this? Well, how can I possibly been thinking that, or whatever. Let's see what we have in this next slide here. And we'll also see about the feelings and emotions and why they seem to interfere with logic and so forth. However, but we'll also see why logic, as in actual practice, the way people call it, like what they're actually doing when they call logic, which isn't really logic, fails plenty, right? People will say, oh, logical, reasonable, and then they'll come up with all kinds of BS. But let's actually stick on this slide for a second. All right, let me start with an illustration I've used before, but I'll just repeat it so we have it in mind just to help us understand this. I'm not trying to be clever here. I'm just trying to, if we can just make this clear, we win. Let's go back to our tried and true kind of Sherlock Holmes and the kind of caricature police detective idea. And it doesn't matter if you've ever read Sherlock Holmes or whatever, but it's easy to kind of picture this sort of caricature or archetype. They both investigate the crime, right? Now, the policeman does not come to the crime and within 1 second decide how it all happened, or without looking at any evidence whatsoever. The policeman, and what the policeman does in this kind of archetypical situation is the policeman will maybe interview suspects, take a look at the crime scene, wait to hear from the coroner, but at some point, but the whole time the policeman wants to come up with a theory, right? They want that there, they want it now, right? They want it sooner rather than later. So their goal is it ends up being to find a best fit, and once that clicks into place, what they would call seeking understanding is seeking enough information to find something that seems to fit. When you're doing that, how does it work? The way it works is it's not like you're oblivious to the world. You actually want to look around and find information, but it's like in one sense, like a curve or something like that, where you want information up to a certain point until things feel like they fit, and then you want to close your ears and say, yeah, blah, 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 right? At that point, you want to delete anything or marginalize away anything that doesn't seem like fit into your pet theory. Oh, that's not important. Oh, this, that. And that's what they do in these stories, right? They come to a conclusion after looking at some facts and after doing some thinking and investigating. But at that point, once they feel like things fit, then they just explain everything away and they're closed-minded and so forth, right? Does that seem familiar, right? That's how we all operate plenty. And a lot of what we call understanding, or that aha moment, or like when we get excited, it's actually a best fit situation rather than actual matching. And as I continue, you'll also see how it's actually the only option for your mind, or for your brain, specifically your brain. There's literally no such thing as matching to your brain. And that'll help us understand why this best fit thing is where it goes to, because it doesn't really have an option by itself. And then Sherlock Holmes is looking to do what? He's actually looking for anomalies. He's looking to make sure that he finds a theory that fits all facts and anomalies, and he's looking all over for anything that might contradict it, right? He's seeking a full match, and in his behavior and his result are very different, right? It's very easy to identify. If you're watching the two, you admire Sherlock Holmes, you feel confident in Sherlock Holmes. No one would ever, after reading those stories, want the policeman to try to solve a crime that was important for them, right? They would always want Sherlock Holmes when they see him do what he does. And yet, it's very possible that if they were actually watching Sherlock Holmes in real life, then they would feel like he was doing something wrong, he was taking too long, or he was being difficult or whatever. And I encounter that. When I do this, then even people that have a lot of confidence in me, they tend to, even myself, sometimes it's hard. Like I feel like it should happen sooner sometimes, and then I remind myself. But it's especially when other people are involved. And now we can see why I harp on things like rushing so much. Anything that makes our goal revert to seeking best fit, that puts pressure on that, is going to interfere with this process. When we actually want things to match, then we always want more from the world, right? We're never afraid of feedback or discovering something. There's no such thing as negative feedback if we're actually going for matching. So whenever you feel afraid of finding something out about reality, or getting a certain email in your inbox, or whatever it might be, then that's evidence that that's the best fit thinking. But the flip side of that that's beautiful is that you can't feel afraid. The more you understand about matching, the more, and for a while there can still be habits and ideas in your mind where you could feel afraid, but you can dissolve it. But the more you set things up this way, the more you're not going to be afraid of the world. Because when you're going for best fit, once things fit, now you're afraid of everything. Right? It's only downhill from there. Because all something can do is like contradict what you already know. I mean, of course you're going to get all kinds of corroboration. Like if you feel like you're God's gift to women, or men or whatever, then you guys don't think that at this point, but you understand what I mean. If a person does, then I don't mean like they're only afraid, but they in a sense, deep down they feel that way and they act that way. Of course, they love it when they'll interpret as much as they can as feedback that fits in with their idea that they're God's gift, right? So I don't mean that they'll interpret all feedback badly. As a matter of fact, they'll force stuff to fit their model constantly and ignore the other stuff. But as they do that, there's still a fear, right? Like underlying all that implicitly is fear. And so, and I talked about that sense of helplessness, right, and so forth in the first alchemy. Best fit, remember I talked about the defense and defense against the defense. Best fit thinking defends itself, right? Once someone feels like they understand, they don't want something to contradict it because it can only hurt them, they feel like. Because they hit their goal, which is to feel like things fit together. When you're going for matching, then life just spirals upward. But you can't be in a rush. As I talked about many times, and I talk about building on what you know and letting the answer fill itself in, that's obvious once you realize, once you have the goal right of going for matching, then it's like a no-brainer to do that. But if you don't have that goal, then it's like impossible. Then it just feels wrong all the time to try and let the answer fill itself in by building on what you know, because you just want to get to the answer. As much as you might claim you don't, your life is about getting to the answer. And then people, even though I'll tell them till I'm blue in the face how to do things right, they'll feel like I haven't told them anything yet, or that I haven't explained how to know what's true yet, because as long as knowing what's true is having things fit, the stuff I'm showing doesn't seem to help with that. It seems to be counterproductive like pretty fast, right? So like Sherlock Holmes' stuff will look like it makes sense for a few minutes to the policeman, right? But then it'll just be annoying after that, once they get to where they have enough information, right, that things seem to fit. And that's what you might have been running into to some degree here and there. And plus, we're so surrounded by this. All right, so when I talk about matching, what do I mean even further? Let me explain that. All right, truth. We're asking, how do I know what's true, right? And then when we realize that the question, how do I know what's true, or how do you know how to know what's true, when we realize that's the same question as how do I solve a problem or get an answer, right? Because how do I know it's true is like, how do I know when an answer is true, right? How do I go about finding an answer and knowing it's true? Or how do I go about creating, knowing that I need to keep creating and building because I don't have the right answer yet, right? And when you know you don't have the right answer yet, then you're open, and when you're open, you're going to build, right? And so it's the same question. And then last session especially, I believe that it was a pretty compelling vision, right? Of, wow, if you can know what to do with a question, then life is crazy, like awesome. All right, so when we talk about how to know what's true, and it's fascinating how, I think in practice, how pretty unique this is, where generally you're just not going to hear success gurus talk about it all comes down to understanding that truth actually involves the concept of matching. It doesn't exactly equal, they're not exactly synonyms, but the idea of matching is the critical idea of understanding just the very idea of truth, and understanding about how to know what's true is the critical idea with solving any problem, which means getting any result whatsoever, including happiness and any piece of success you want in life. So results, success, happiness come down to having a method for dealing with questions, right? Problem solving comes down to having a method dealing with questions. That comes down to a method for knowing what's true, and knowing what's true comes down to understanding that the critical component for truth involves matching. And that is the key to success, period, and happiness, especially as we completely clarify that by distinguishing it from this best fit type thinking. So what do I mean by truth, by that matching is the critical component for truth? Well, the idea of something being true literally means that one thing truly matches something else. There's no such thing as an assertion of truth without that is coherent, that carries water, so to speak, unless it boils down to an assertion that one thing matches another. So if you want to ask me, how do you know it's true, David? The way you know what's true in any case with any problem with any question, the true answer, you need to get to the point where you can identify what two things match each other in every case. And then you could say, well, how do I know if things match each other? But here's the thing. Once you get this, and I'll, of course, continue to elaborate for like an hour, right? But as this comes together for you, but I already told you, it's just a matter of me continuing to elaborate. Or I already gave you enough of the key that you could also run with this pretty well at this point. Because once you start applying this, you'll see. You'll also see how it's difficult a lot. That you're by default, you're constantly, your mind is constantly giving you these senses of like truth statements, like, oh, that's true, this is true. Even again, like that example of like, that guy's a jerk, right? Or yeah, I'm a good person, I'm intelligent, I'm smart. Well, that any statement like that implicitly starts with, it is true that, right? If I think, well, I'm a pretty good person, right? I'm a pretty smart person. If I were to think that, and this is, I'm just saying this hypothetically, I'm not asserting that or not about myself. But if I were to say that, it's the same thing as saying, yeah, it is true that I'm a pretty good person, right? Or I'm an intelligent person. Well, the only way that statement could even make any sense is if I can identify what matches what. In this case, what you probably need to understand the idea of thresholds, or standards, right? Like I talk about standards and norms. You must be saying that it must involve that there's an identifiable threshold, like a standard, of what intelligence is, that you have clarity about, and that you have clarity that you're over that threshold. That's what, in that case, that's what the matching would involve, to give you an example of what I mean by matching, right? The statement, yeah, I'm a good person, means that the only way for you to be clear about that would be to have total clarity about the threshold, or enough clarity that you could be sure you were able to get over it, right? Like exceed it. You wouldn't have to have full clarity of the threshold as long as you had full clarity about something about it where you could be sure of exceeding it. But so if someone's like, yeah, I think I'm a good person, and most people would affirm that statement, and the bizarre thing is that when they do that, they don't have any clarity about what's matching what when they're saying that. So that's eye-opening, isn't it? They just have a feeling like it fits, right? And where's that feeling? Well, the brain, in this case I can equate brain and mind, the brain of their mind goes in and creates associations. It goes out and it creates like an archetype also, which is a bunch of, like it's composed of a bunch of associations of like, well, what are examples of a good person, right? And person doesn't like do this consciously, it just kind of got accumulated in their mind as they're growing up. And then that becomes this archetype that they're hardly aware of, not aware of at all, who knows how aware people are. And then they just get a feeling like they're exceeding that, or that they're keeping up with it. But then the brain will give them this sense like, yeah, you're a good person. And that's best fit. That's what I mean is if someone's satisfied with that, here's the important thing. If someone's satisfied with that, then that means their goal is for best fit. They're only seeking best fit. They're not seeking matching, because if you're seeking matching and what I call seeking understanding of what's good, true, what's important about what's good and true, then you would be looking to identify specifically and clearly what that means, and then how you're doing according to that. And then another question would be, why are you even concerned with that? Because if someone is acting like it matters that they're a good person, they're actually asserting another statement, which is, it is true that, it is important that I'm a good person. So they're making at least two assertions here. One is an assertion about the truth that they're a good person. Another is an assertion about the importance of it. If they're acting as if it matters, then it must be important, or that they're asserting that it's important. And then important how or why? For something to be important, we're talking about impact. If we're talking about impact, it must be relative to an objective. So what's the objective? Why be obsessed with being a good person? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the goal? You see? So once again, even the assertion that thinking and acting and doing stuff and spending resources in order to feel the best fit feeling that you're a good person even that goal itself, to feel the best fitness of being a good person, right? There's two things going on. There's actually, when you, and as I give this example, you'll see how you can apply this broadly, or it helps you to see distinction in the future. There's the truth about being a good person, and then there's the assertion that it matters in the first place because people spend resources on that it's important. Again, so if it's important, then, and if you're agreeing that it's important, if you're asserting or act, but then if we're implicitly asserting it by acting on the idea that it matters, by spending money and time and letting it be a goal that affects our actions and our sense of importance otherwise in life, then why is it important to be a good person? If that's the answer to a question, if that's something we're striving for, then how do we know it's true? That it is important to be a good person, and as always, that something have to match something else, and something can only be important relative to an objective, because you're trying to have an impact on achieving an objective, right? The concept of importance has to be tied to some objective. Right? And that objective could be, goodness in your consciousness field, like the experience of goodness. That makes sense. But one way or the other has to be some objective. And then as we examine the good person thing, actually, in order to experience the most goodness consciously, right? That's where goodness actually resides, is in your consciousness field, not out there in the world of reasons. The precursors, the reasons why you feel you experience goodness or badness exist out there in the world. But the goodness and badness itself resides is a conscious experience, is a component of your conscious experience. So if you want more good and less bad, then why would you shoot for being a best fit good person? Wouldn't you shoot for perfectly getting rid of all bad ideas and understanding as many good ideas that lead to good, as many reasons, right, that lead, or that type of thing that leads to good in your conscious field and others, and dissolving things that lead to bad. So there's no more standard. There's no more what's generally good. There's no more norm. The norm would be perfection. But there's no longer this like, oh, I feel bad if I don't fit it, right? You just want to match perfection. And in some cases, there's no absolute tip-top of perfection, just like you can't count to all the numbers, all the whole numbers or whatever, right? There's always another one. So there can always be more good. So you don't have like perfect good, but you can get rid of bad ideas. It's the ones that you can keep examining them and seeking matching, and it'll keep dissolving bad ideas in your mind, and then you'll communicate that to others and help them. You see, so seeking matching will constantly be effective for you. And so if you want to know what's true, it boils down to one thing matches another truly, and you're seeking to understand that. Now, as you do that, you're going to come across plenty of things where you're going to say to me or yourself, or you're going to realize, well, how can I ever know that? How can I ever know if this thing matches another? Well, what's the law of implication? Focus on what you can know and build from there. So if there's things you can't know, then what you do is you look around for relevant things that you can know and keep building on there. And that'll at least narrow down the best fit situation. You're always going to act best fit basically on your current level of knowledge, understanding, the current accuracy of your mental model, and so forth, right? Your current level of ideas, whatever, however you want to think of that. You're going to act on that anyway, all the time. So you don't have to worry about when do I do best fit and that sort of thing. That's just what your brain's doing automatically based on the current accuracy of your thinking. By the time you reflect on something, it basically already happened, right? So you're just trying to improve your ideas, and then you and your body, your mind will act on better ideas. So things you can't know, well, there you go. Focus on what you can, and you're going to find constantly that it's not going to be a problem. And then this is when I've given you important components to all this, which involves hitting a target, like I talked about, where you don't necessarily need a bullseye, the idea of a threshold, which is similar, and the idea of boundaries, right? When it comes to money, right, you don't know exactly the dollar figure that you need for your life to not have to worry about money, do you? Like in practice, right? So what do? You just come up with it with a reasonable threshold, right? You focus on what you do know. Well, and remember I talked about you go to extremes, right? I've given you all of the ingredients once you realize that this is what you're trying to do, all right? Or at least I've given you plenty, and anything I haven't given you can fill in yourself. Or, look in previous recordings, or we can do more stuff together, whatever. But so much of what I've talked to you will fall into place even more clearly based on this. So with the money and the threshold, well, go to extremes. Is $1 going to do it? No, right? Do you need $10 million? Probably not. Not once you realize you can do things like annuities, right? Whole life insurance, whatever. So then you eyeball it, right? But and then you just get above that, and then remember I told you can stipulate, right? Is it a reasonable stipulation? If it's in a gray area where it's not clear, then fine, you stipulate and you go from there. And then more will reveal itself to you, won't it? Right? You can make $1 million and go from there and see if that's enough, or see where you stand at that point. Maybe you're doing something that you enjoy, or that you almost can't even get out of unless you earn another bunch of money anyway, right? I couldn't just stop earning money tomorrow. Everyone would be screwed, right? Can't just drop the mic and go home, as people say. So you see, it's simple. It's not that tough, right? When you realize about thresholds and you realize about boundaries, right? Do I know every moral best action I can do? No. But then you can understand about property rights, and that is something you do know. And if people just took care of that, then so much stuff in the world would clear itself up. Or people say, how would the government fund itself without taxation? Say, well, I don't need to know that. You don't need to know everything, ever, right? Luckily. You focus on what you do know and you build from there. So I don't know the answer of what the best government looks like. But I start with what I do know, which is let's not, burn small children, harvest their organs, tax people, whatever, enslave doctors, right? That's wrong. I mean, we don't do that, but I'm saying that just as much as taxation makes sense, or jury duty, we could just enslave all doctors and solve our health problems for a while, right? Or at least solve the cost. But no, we don't do that, and then more will reveal itself. I've said to you, as you build on what you know, more will reveal itself. Just the same thing with you understanding what I'm talking about in alchemy. The more you use what you can understand from what I say, the more of it will reveal itself. So don't worry when you spot something, oh, I don't know the answer to that. Don't try to force best fit in, you see? And this is a good opening for me to show you. So now let's look at like forcing. I think I have a little bit of a slide here. Okay, so like forcing and rushing and like behaviorism and negative emotions and so forth, these are best fit tactics. Do you see that if your goal ends up being twisted to best fit, then how do you make something fit? Can you force something in to fit? Yeah, right? But you can't force something to match, can you? If you're trying to understand if something matches perfectly, right? Matching imperfectly is just fitting, right? But even if something matches imperfectly, there's still aspects of it that might match. Suppose I have two paintings. I'll just give a real simple, silly example. And they both have 3 sheep in the painting, and those sheep are white in both cases, and they're on a pasture. But then other than that, there's a bunch of differences in the painting. So the paintings don't match exactly, but the 3 sheep match, the whiteness of the sheep's wool matches, and the fact that they're on a pasture matches. Do you see? So metaphorically, you can focus on that if necessary. Like there's always a whole bunch of stuff that you'll know whenever you look for what you know. If you're talking to a future client that you never talked to before, like a potential client or potential customer or whatever, then you might not know what to say, but you know stuff, right? Like you know what's worked in the past, you know what hasn't worked. You at least know that you have a sense that you remember, right? You know that if you stipulate, you know that if your memory isn't deceiving you, that certain things have worked in the past in some circumstances. So you can at least know that poking around with it is reasonable if you can't find anything else, right? Try that. But you also can know that the more you can think of differences with this person versus other people, and the more kind of important distinctions you have, and I listed those in the mind reading one, right? Maybe that was 21 or somewhere around there of the alchemies. Then what will those do? The steps I gave you for the mind reading of other people, it will help you fill in some things you'll know more, right? even if it's just a little bit. Again, you can take things to the extremes and just to get a sense, like, okay, I don't know how old this person is, but I know they're not 20, and I know they're not 80. I'm just giving you a sense, right? Or I don't know what their financial situation is, but pretty clearly they're not a millionaire, but they're also not so poor that they can't pay me something for my services. You see? So even just narrowing it down like that, you're focusing on something you can know, right? And you keep focusing there, and everything else will take care of itself. Better and better, all right? And now, so we see how forcing works when the goal is for best fit, right? It works like, okay, it's like it seems to work sometimes, so it's a worthwhile tactic, right? You can force, like physically, you can force with your own mind to have beliefs where your mind, you don't even realize it's doing it, right? But it'll have confirmation bias. That's like a type of force, right? When it like selectively seeks out evidence that'll corroborate the belief that it has because it wants it to keep fitting, right? And we know, of course, that people have confirmation bias. They want to believe what they already believe, right? Why is that? Best fit, right? This explains everything. When you look at this best fit versus matching, life makes sense nonstop. And then we see why using force seems to work sometimes, and so it's one of the things in our toolbox, but it's not really in my toolbox unless there's maybe an absolute emergency, right? Best fit isn't always wrong, but you don't really want to seek it. It'll happen automatically, right? Again, on each webinar, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and it's basically, in one sense, best fit. Like I'm consciously involved, looking to see if things match after I say something, and so forth as best I can. But again, we're always operating, our body and our thinking, our brain is always going to operate at the current level of ideas that it has at that moment, right? So best fit goes on automatically, but we don't need to double down on it consciously. It'll take care of itself. The extent to which like something needs to be forced will just kind of take care of itself. And there might be times when using force seems right and it's wrong, but you'll uncover that. You'll see how it wasn't helpful as you keep seeking matching better and better. And you're trying to understand what's true about, first, the things that have the most impact. And then as soon as we realize that importance matters, that impact obviously matters, having our priorities straight matters, then where do we start to look for our matching to start with? Goals, objectives, right? Because we can't figure out importance unless we're clear on objectives. And that's why I talk about decluttering. I talk about having one active objective at a time. You see? You have one active objective, you can judge matching better. Now it makes even more sense. Of course, it probably felt right or made some sense back when I said it. Or you could probably see it even logically. But now you can see how it fits in with this whole scheme. But it not just fits in, but it matches. If you have something that matches perfectly, it will also fit. If you have like a receptor or a key or a lock, and there's a key that matches it, that matches the opening, the key isn't going to match the lock, right? The key is different, but it matches in the sense that it matches in terms of fitting. Like if you define does it fit truly, then the match is whether the key fits truly, and that also involves just a threshold, which is perfectly fine, meaning that whether a key fits a lock in real life, a few molecules could change, right? But it'll still fit. So there's still a threshold, and it fits the lock or it doesn't. And it matches fitting the lock or not. It matches being above the threshold, you see? So once again, thresholds and boundaries can allow you to match the boundary, to be within the boundary. And then there might be a gray area, but one thing that does match is you are definitely within the boundary. You see? That's a thing that can be true or not. If for some reason there's a certain amount of force you can use where there's not going to be a backlash, for whatever reason, I'm just stipulating that, then you can, then if that was the case, and if that force got you over a threshold, then that force got you to match to truly get over the threshold, right? If that's the case. In that case, the force could be okay. If getting over the threshold was more important, had more of an impact than the backlash, then that's okay. But then that's why we have the boundary with property rights, where it's not about observing a backlash, because like the logical backlash is infinite for violating property rights. You can't match that. You can't make that to match. You have to knowingly have a contradiction. Or to not know there's a contradiction when you're violating property rights, you have to not understand something so fundamental to the world, so which is impossible if you're seeking understanding. You can't like both be seeking understanding and not understand one of the most important things that leads to goodness. So, and then you don't want to contradict that. That might be a little vague, but it's not. We can move on. Okay, rushing, right? If you're in a rush, to be avoided whenever it's reasonable, because it's going to make best fit feel. It's going to push you towards best fit rather than matching, and it's just going to give you less time to seek understanding, right, and so forth. People get themselves in rushes typically for when I talked about using pain to overcome pain. As you seek understanding properly, as I'm talking about here with the matching, then you'll dissolve these bad ideas that lead to pain, and you won't need to use pain to overcome pain. So you won't need to set these deadlines and rush yourself. When you can get your priorities straight through matching, through understanding, then you won't need to force priorities on yourself by setting an artificial deadline or declaring publicly you're going to do it by this time, or rushing for whatever reason, or just feeling like the world's crumbling and you have to rush. Life will spiral upward, so in the background it'll keep getting better and better. Time will get on your side. You won't have to rush for that reason. And then as you dissolve things that make you feel like rushing makes sense, you see how it's a spiral. When you're in the best fit model, force begets force, and rushing begets rushing, and pain begets pain. Like you need pain to overcome the pain that's in your way of accomplishing things, and so forth. As you dissolve because you understand better and you're using matching rather than best fit, then you get in a spiral, like I said, where it seems right to seek matching, and then it will seem wrong to rush because it'll obviously interfere with building on what you know and letting the answer fill itself in. People do best fit, or the brain does. First of all, it has no choice, and I'll explain that right now, like in just a moment. I referred to that I would explain it earlier, but now I'll get to it very soon. If best fit is the only thing that exists, and that's how it is to your brain just assumes that without realizing it, it's just the processing mechanism, and it's the only thing available to it by itself, then all the problems and the crazy things that people do and that make sense to people make sense. If best fit was the only way, your brain does a great job with it. It would make sense to have confirmation bias and so forth, right? If the only way you could persuade somebody or move forward in life is to feel confident, if the only way to feel confident is this best fit thinking, right? Then you might as well have confirmation bias. You might as well interpret anything so it makes you feel more competent and confident, and you might as well delete any feedback that might be the opposite, right? If that's the only way. If there's a different way to get to confidence, basically to get to unconflicted thinking, besides confirmation bias, marginalizing, deleting, right? Forcing, rushing, and all that stuff. If there's a way that works better, that consistently works every time, and matching has to work every time when you achieve it. So seeking it makes sense. And you're not going to have a problem. It's never really best fit or matching. You don't even have to, you make the choice in the sense of that you consciously keep seeking matching, but you don't have to worry, oh no, what about if I could just easily have something fit? That'll just keep happening because, again, you're as I keep saying, your body and mind and brain will keep on doing the best fit thing anyway automatically. But what you want to consciously do is keep seeking matching. Then you'll keep having more and more understanding. You'll keep seeing more good things, less dissolve bad things. When you have perfect clarity on a particular thing in terms of matching, which let me remind you, can involve thresholds. So you don't have to have perfect extra clarity. You just have to understand, all right, the threshold I'm going to first stipulate, I'm going to go for $1 million, and then see from there. And you can perfectly match that, right? You could actually accomplish that fully. You could fully make $1 million or more potentially. What I mean is that can be done to literal perfection, right? If you make $1 million or more, then you've perfectly exceeded that stipulation, that threshold of $1 million. So you can have things match perfectly. I just gave you an example there. Your bank account can perfectly match $1 million or more, right? Perfectly. So don't worry, oh no, maybe I can never know enough for things to match perfectly. Conceptually, it can happen. Now let me show you what's going on with our brain. Imagine for a moment you are your brain. You are in the physical world. I understand that I've explained to you that that physical world is made of reasons, but there's still the physical world made of reasons. So now let's just operate within the physical world that we're normally familiar with. Well, let's imagine we're our brain. We're not conscious, right? So stop being conscious. But seriously, imagine your brain. Your brain. Then, now, what's the inputs to your brain? Basically photons and there's stuff that, there's sound waves, right? All that gets converted into electrochemical signals, right? In nerves. So those never match each other. If you see a tree and then you look at that exact same tree in the next second, the neurochemical impulses, the photons, whatever, are not going to be exactly identical, are they? And interestingly enough, even if they were, how would you compare them? You'd have to, that would be tough too, to compare to see if they're exactly matched. You need a whole separate mechanism to check every single impulse and against the other, right? You see, you need like a whole third system to double check, you see. So, but in real life, the physical world is always changing and it never matches itself, and two things don't match each other. And when you see somebody, they look different, their molecules are different, the electrons in their body vibrated or whatever, right? So nothing's ever actually alike. So what's your brain trying to do? The only thing it can do is best fit. Because literally nothing ever matches in the physical world. It only matches in a best fit sort of way. Whenever that's over the threshold of what you need, whenever best fit works, then that's why people do plenty of stuff okay and smart and very competently and so forth, right? So the overlap between what matches, functionally matches, and what works with best fit, whenever the overlap works or is correct or happens, just happens, the overlap happens, then it's effectively the same thing in those cases. But whenever it fails, then it fails, right? In my famous example with taxation, our usual way of figuring out what's a good person is we just sort of look at what's normal for people that obviously aren't like, doing things that just don't work for us, right? Like obviously being violent or whatever is clearly bad or just really mean to us, whatever. So we go and we see a bunch of people and they think the taxation's fine, but they it's kind of not the best fit match, right? They best fit with the norm of like what a good person is. And so, okay, taxation's fine. Good people think it's okay by best fit. Well, actually, that's incredibly wrong, right? It's horrific. It's once we look at it in terms of matching, then it's obviously exactly matches extortion. And then we take a look and see if the government can take something and make an immoral thing into something moral. And as we examine that, we can see that it can't. I'm just glossing over it for now. I'm not going to reprove it. But it matches. It doesn't match. Once we're seeking matching, it's so clearly one way. The best fit way of thinking, it's so clearly, so to speak, the other. So strongly feels fine. To the point where it might feel very bizarre if I say that certain normal, good-looking people are functioning as if they're worse than rapists or whatever, arsonists or organ harvesters or whatever. So that just seems bizarre in the best fit way of thinking. But when I just alchemize, tease things apart, look to see what matches what and what doesn't match what, it's all perfectly clear with the property rights. And whenever someone tries to make a case that government can magically make an immoral thing moral, normal people don't even believe that. If we just take it to the extreme or show them examples, they don't. I can give countless examples in an instant where no one believes that voting can make certain things right or wrong. Right? No one thinks that lighting a child on fire for fun would be okay if we just had a constitutional amendment saying that was all right, or if Congress passed a law saying anyone could light kids on fire for fun. Right? No one would think that was now okay. and then every new argument they made, I could just dissolve it using the matching. They'd say, well, okay, but there's no greater good for that, David. But I can come up with a zillion greater good examples that no one would affirm is okay, because they just have a best fit thing where they have just individual examples of things that are wrong, right? Like organ harvesting just seems wrong, but we could have a greater good thing, right? You could transfer an organ you could take a child, cut out their organs while they're alive, and then they would die. But then they might be able to save 3 lives, and we could sell those organs to people and use that money for all sorts of other benefits. Maybe we could buy several heifers, cows, and according to Heifer International, the charity, then one $500 heifer can transform an entire family, give it a whole industry, give it a whole business, and provide food and everything. So the greater good thing, again, the minute we look for an extreme or just look at it closely, it dissolves. So people don't even actually believe. It doesn't match what they themselves believe, that the government can make an immoral thing moral. So it all falls apart, but it seems so real to people, so normal to think that it's okay, and so crazy to say that, this little old happy lady who's a teacher, that she not is in general evil. We can't know that, but that action is just like a serial evil thing, serial like SERIAL. It doesn't seem to fit, but as we use matching, it's totally obvious and clear. With evolution, which I also won't get into detail again, I did it before. I think it was number 20 of Alchemy. I understand how it fits, right? It's easy to make it fit. It's easy to make like terrorism fit, right? If you just restrict yourself to just certain assumptions and certain ways of looking at the world. It's easy. I demonstrated to people in a shocking way how both Abraham Lincoln and Truman with the bomb, right? How for so many people and Americans that fits like it's a good decision. But as soon as I tease it apart, but that kind of gives us insight into how a terrorist could think, right? Because most Americans, or many Americans, myself included previously, for years, until like my 30s at least, if not even, I think my 30s, just because I hadn't thought about it very clearly before. But once I looked at it, clearly incinerating young girls or children, or even adults, of course, that haven't directly done something where you just have to stop them, right? Like, is just obviously wrong, right? But just by deciding that there's such a thing as Japanese people as a whole, that's like one entity, one decision-making entity, like one person almost, that can then attack us, right? And all of a sudden it seems like a good idea, or we say like, well, it saved American lives, and that sort of thing, and so that makes it okay. But we can see how easy, it's a shocking example of how easily something that doesn't match at all, once we use matching, the right way of thinking, just feels like it matches so well. And it felt that same way to me. I can easily feel it. Just like Abraham Lincoln seems like a great guy, except that he actually enslaved tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more boys, right? And sent them in many cases just to be cannon fodder, literal cannon fodder, where they're blown apart into a mist of blood, right? And so it just instantly doesn't match, doesn't make any sense. We would clearly call such a person a monster, not a good person, no matter what else they did. And the idea that it makes up for it by abolishing slavery, what kind of standard is that? You and I, again, our own standard, and follow me through here in case you think I'm about to say something else, but which of us on this recording, if we were had a paper in front of us, or had the decision, which of us between maintaining slavery and ending it wouldn't end it? Like, presumably all of us would end slavery, so why is that such an incredibly good action, right? We all would, right, and slavery, I presume. So it's like saying that Hitler was nice to his dog or something like that, right? Most of us have been nice to our dog, but it doesn't make the rest of what he did okay. And so same thing with Lincoln. So it's amazing how in some cases what seems to fit doesn't match. I've talked about in relationships how it seems to make sense about fairness and justice in like romantic relationships or close, even friendship relationships, whatever. And people will just go back and forth getting justice on each other, when in fact, presumably both want the other person to be happy. All you need is for them to understand things better, and then they can make decisions where you're not like hurting each other back and forth just so that the person knows how you feel. But that feels like it makes sense to so many people. Most everybody at some point feels like that. like that justice makes sense, instead of understanding, in some cases, repentance, in some cases the person didn't do anything wrong at all. We just feel like they did because they didn't do what we wanted, right? And it seems wrong because it was against our goal, right? Remember, the mind twists our goals into that which, the mind twists the idea of good into that which furthers the goals that it has. So we'll feel like someone did something bad. It also thinks that good and bad are like on the same sliding scale. So it's like it was bad if someone didn't help us further our goal when we feel like they should. And then someone doesn't, then we want to like get back at them or withhold something. And that seems to make sense. But the minute we think, well, what's the actual objective in a romantic relationship? Isn't it like for ourselves and the other person to be as happy as possible, right? It's like a vision where you guys are just on a team to do whatever to make the other person happy within the scope of what you're willing to do. I don't mean literally sacrifice everything to make the other person happy. What I mean is that you're constantly looking for these win-wins, right? And there's a whole lot of them in a romantic relationship. If you start out with someone you have chemistry with, there's all these bazillion simple opportunities where it's just purely better, that you guys can both make each other happier so easily, constantly. That's the objective. If people stop and think and stop and fixate it, so that if they understood how to know what's true, it involves matching. And then we care about importance, then we care about the objective, and then you want to keep that objective fixed in your mind so you can keep comparing to it. Why do you have to compare? Because matching. Matching means one thing has to match another. So you keep the real objective in mind, which people totally don't do, right? And plus it gets cluttered with all sorts of other stuff. But the real objective in a romantic relationship is so freaking simple if it's kept in mind. The answers are constantly obvious. Not the exact perfect thing to say every time, but over a threshold, hitting the target in general is massively easy. If both people keep the simple objective in mind, like, wait a second, we just want to seek win-wins whenever they come up, whenever there's overlap where we can do something where it makes us or the other person happy. And the opportunities for that are like nonstop, and where you have chemistry with someone in a romantic relationship. And that's all you need. If you guys want to watch something different on TV, then get 2 freaking TVs and just watch it separately. There's not an overlap at that moment, right? Have separation if you need it. And then there's going to be zillion, why force it, right? There's going to be plenty of places where you overlap naturally, where you're more than happy to do something that makes the other person happy, and you're glad to do it. And that's all people need. It's the simplest thing in the world when you look at it that way with romantic relationships. But people aren't looking to match that objective because they just don't realize. And instead they're doing best fit with all sorts of cluttered objectives and justice and so forth. So whenever these things don't overlap between matching and best fit, then you have people acting like morons once you see it, right? And it's nothing to do ever with feeling superior. That never matches. When would you ever want to feel superior to somebody else? Doesn't make any sense. You would want to judge that you're superior at a particular activity or skill if it's clear and necessary, right? If you have to decide which of you is going to pull the other person up who's hanging over a cliff with a rope, right? Or that's drowning, and one of you has to go, save the person. Or if there's just I'm giving extreme examples, but if you're doing a business task and one person has to meet with someone to make a sale, and you pick which one. You obviously want to assess who's going to be most effective at a task, right? But that isn't about feeling superior in general. There shouldn't be a feeling of like moral superiority shouldn't creep in there. So anyway, whenever you don't have an overlap with what seems to fit and matching, you get these crazy conclusions. In evolutionary theory, it feels like it fits. It feels like it makes sense. And I could explain why that is. I mean, it's not that hard to, the vague picture of you have these organisms and they have mutations and there's different stuff, and like nature's always trying out these varieties. All we have to do is like personify nature, right? And people, evolutionists are always anthropomorphizing evolution. They're like, oh, evolution was ingenious here. It was clever here. And it created this and it pushed for that. And they're like, oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. But why does that language keep coming out, right? But anyhow, it's kind of easy to picture the general situation where you have this diversity and then things that like help you survive better or help an organism survive better, and then all you have to do is just kind of fudge that a little bit into like not just surviving better, but it's kind of like looks more evolved, advantaged, right? Wings seem nifty, big brains, the ability to talk seem nifty, right? Whatever, big muscles, our ability to run faster. It all seems like it that's like an improvement. So we just think of natural selection as nature's trying to like prefers improvements, and then which is not what natural selection means. Natural selection means the most grandkids, whoever produces the most grandkids, not like what looks like an improvement if you're a human, just checking out the animal. Once you realize about producing the most grandkids, then an oak tree is never going to be an improvement over a bacteria, right, or a cockroach, right? As soon as you fix it, once you have to make things match, then you are interested in figuring out what's matching what, and that's why it's easy to see the most grandkids thing. That's what natural selection really means. That's a great way to represent it. That's clear. This idea of just like stuff that seems better is what it equivocates into in practice. And then, so the idea is that nature likes and pushes towards stuff being better, like organisms having better organs and limbs and stuff, the intelligence and so forth. So we call that like an evolutionary advantage, and that becomes like what natural selection means. And then we equivocate the idea of a mutation, which is just a single, you could theoretically have a whole bunch of these at once, but each mutation is one letter that's different to have one different amino acid and one protein. That's it, period, in DNA. DNA, every 3 letters in DNA codes for one amino acid and a protein once it's translated. That's what a mutation is. But what we have to do is equivocate that into like a gross morphological change and just feel like those are always going on. Wings just pop up and, you know, and so forth, that nucleuses or the ability to fix bad radiation mutations that happen, which is critical for a single cell organism to not die out. And or us, it causes cancer, right, radiation. So it's critical to have a defense against that. But stuff like that, as long as you feel like mutations could just do that kind of thing, big, huge additions, and then as soon as you equivocate natural selection, grandkids, with the way it properly should be, into these evolutionary advantages, survival advantages, then evolution makes perfect sense. It fits. But as soon as you look at it properly, where most grandkids and the mutations are one amino acid and one protein at a time, then none of it makes sense. It's the most ridiculous thing in ever. And then once you start to look at how it would have to get started, which is that it couldn't possibly, and so on and so forth, then there's 1,000 places, or really, literally millions in a sense, where it's like literally millions of individual ridiculous ideas, piled on ridiculous ideas. It's so incredibly absurd a theory that it's not even close. Like someone shouldn't even be able to wipe their own drool off their face. But they can, because this best fit thing explains it. Anytime best fit works, then people look smart, and they can function, and they look like professors or whoever. And because they feel that best fit, they actually disdain people that think that evolution doesn't work. But when you look at it in terms of matching, it's the easiest thing in the world to see how incredibly silly it is. It's just not even in the universe of close. I have no problem staking my entire reputation that it's not even anywhere near close. It's beyond absurd as a theory. Just the same way I'm comfortable saying by the normal standards of who's a monster and who isn't. And again, I assert that we shouldn't ever want someone to be hurt, even if we want them stopped, and we shouldn't generally judge anyone, including Abraham Lincoln or whoever. But by our normal standards of what's a monster, then obviously someone who enslaves like on the order of 100,000 boys and sends them in front of cannons and muskets, that's a monster, right? What is it they say? Like you kill one person, you're a murderer. You kill 10, you're a mass murder. You kill 100 or so, you're a serial killer. You kill 10,000, then you're a king, right? Or a president or something, or a hero or whatever. But I'm confident saying that by our normal standards of what human is a monster, then Abraham Lincoln is a total monster. And therefore anyone that admires him is someone that admires monsters, right? It's the same thing as admiring, or worse, by far worse than admiring Charles Manson or the 9/11 hijackers, right? They only killed like 5,000 people, right, or 3,000 people, compared to Abraham Lincoln, right? He killed God knows how many. Or the point is, by the time you're parsing the difference, it becomes absurd. I'm not saying one's necessarily worse than the other, but it becomes silly. But if I were to say I admire those guys are awesome. They're one of my heroes, those 9/11. I'm not saying that, of course, that's my absurd example. Then you would immediately think that, I mean, maybe you think so highly of me that you'd at least be willing to hear my explanation, but there is none. I would never say something like that. That's absolutely crazy to admire someone like that, those terrorists, for 9/11. But it's interesting, we can match once again. That shows your own thinking. Forget about me for a second. If a person were to say, I greatly admire those terrorists, then you would instantly think that there was something really off about that person. So what about someone now, by your own thinking, what about someone that admires Abraham Lincoln? Right? Fascinating, right? So it all makes sense with matching, and then we see how it feels wrong or why people don't get to it with best fit. Okay, behaviorism. Let me, did I write the XY thing? Yeah, let me pop down to this. And I already covered this. Do you see how nothing can ever match to your brain, right? When your brain is trying to make sense out of the physical world, then nothing matches. And then when it comes to learning language, nothing matches either. It associates, it fits. Like a tree is like a sound, right? Or it's written letters, and then it's supposed to be associated with like a physical object, right? And then you have a conscious experience of a tree, plus there's like supposed to be a tree out there, and it all doesn't match, and yet we all think of it like it's all the same thing. So our brain is constantly has to deal with these things where best fit is the only way. And someone might say, well, wait, David, are you saying best fit's the only way sometimes? Yeah, basically, I've been saying that. You want to build, I didn't say the path to omniscience is the law of implication. I didn't say keep building on what you know, and one day you'll know everything. Never said that. Never meant that. There's bazillions of stuff you'll never, ever know, right? Do you know the configuration of every molecule in Paris right now, or even in your own room? Of course not. If you keep following the law of implication, do you think you will? No, right? Am I ever going to know the exact perfect wording of a set of and the number of webinars that will make the most impact on people? No, right? So there's a jillion things that you'll never know. The point is that you'll maximize your impact if you keep on building in the right way, seeking understanding. And I think it is possible to get over the threshold of dissolving all the bad ideas. You see? And then we build more good. We don't have to know everything in order to dissolve bad ideas and to build more good. It's not necessary. Oh, I'll get to the X and Y. But faith. Let's revisit faith. Let's look at faith and how it gets twisted, and then the real meaning in best fit versus matching, just to give yet another kind of angle or mirror or whatever on best fit versus matching. So what is faith morphed into in people's usage? Right? It's shocking. People will say, oh, I know that by faith. Or they'll say, I don't need to know it because I believe it. I have faith, so what would I have to know? And of course, this relates to people knowing that God exists. You have people that just so many years I was trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Why do people that seem to be really dedicated even to God not care whether God actually exists? And this explains it. They already have a best fit. It already fits into their worldview so thoroughly that God does exist that they look at me talking about matching and they're like, why would I need like, there's no such thing as matching to a brain, right? So there's no such thing. They can't even comprehend what I could be talking about when I say you can know that God exists. What I mean is it can match. If you seek matching, you can get there with God's existence. You can know it perfectly, that God exists. There has to be some thing, some being, some entity capable of creating and adjusting your consciousness field, and that entity is obviously doing it nonstop, ongoing. It has to. That's God. And that entity would have to be aware of your consciousness field, have to be aware of everyone else's, wouldn't be deceived, so would want goodness, etc., etc. Not to refer to God as an it, but I'm just in the flow of what I was saying there. Of course, gender dissolves ultimately, except as metaphor when you talk about God. So this is why people just don't, in practice, care to know how to know that God exists. At least most people, so many people, and so many Christians just don't give a crap. And pastors just feel like it'll confuse their congregation and don't have no interest in hearing what I have to say about it. Why? Because they already have best fit. Anything else is negative after that. Take them backward. Can't ever have a benefit once something fits. Right? Now, it could if it was just clearly reinforcing. Like there could be a little benefit in reinforcing what they already know. So like an apologist, which is like someone who has like a bunch of proof in a compelling, persuasive, entertaining way that God exists, where they're just piling on more evidence, more fittedness, right? More fittingness, and more best fit fodder. That could be welcome, but not me. because what I want to do is smash their fitting foundation and start from scratch and build where they have it right. And that's what I'm trying to do with you with everything, having to do with your understanding of the world and everything. So that's not very welcome, right? So I had to kind of disguise it a bit and slide it in there for this. Plus, we have an amazing group of people that really wants this to a shocking degree. But it's crazy, right? In terms of just going after God's existence, it's and in terms of knowing it for sure, it just doesn't have, like, I've never met a pastor that just didn't rebel against it totally and was like, why would I want that? There may be some, but I haven't encountered them yet. And then this explains what's going on more clearly. I feel like there's a little bit of an open thread. But let's talk about is your goal for X or XY? And I've talked about, I don't know if in Alchemy I phrased it this way, I've done it in some law of implication recordings, where I would say it's like a goal for appearance, an appearance-based goal. And this will help you understand that much better. So I wrote here, is your goal for X or for XY? And here's what I mean. Your brain, even you, but by the time something gets in your consciousness field, I just want to make sure I'm thinking how to say this. All right. If you look at a tree, all right, and then you have a conscious visual experience of that tree, right, while you're looking at it, then if we're referring to the conscious visual experience of the tree, then that visual experience is an X in a certain way. It's one thing. Sorry, like I'm experiencing the visual image. I'm experiencing that. If we switch to what we mean and we're referring to the tree out there, or I would call it the reason for the tree, or the reason for the experience of the tree, but or part of the reason, or the physical world aspect of the reason. Then, so there's the tree in the physical world, just like if you're looking at a video game screen and there's a tree on the video game screen because you're playing on the computer screen, right? When you're playing a video game, if you're looking at a tree as part of the scenery in the computer game, then there's a counterpart to that image that you see on the screen that's in the code, right? There's like the potential code for it, and then there's like the fact that it's showing on your screen right now in like the RAM, right? Would have to be in the code, both of those. So there's that code. You don't see the code. So we could also imagine it as there's like the code for the tree mixed with processing, X and Y, the code and the processing, and then you get even like a Z, right? I could put a Z. But it's really XY. I don't even know if I want the Z. I'll keep it on here and we'll see. I'll just see. I know what I'm talking about. This is just about explaining it best and not. So we could also understand that the tree that we see on the computer screen, or the tree that we experience in our in our consciousness field, there's a number of reasons behind it. One is like the physical tree, or the code for the physical tree in the physical world. And then there's like our visual system and the mental processing. It all kind of mixes together. And then we get that, that visual image of the tree. Let me switch to another example quickly as well. Suppose you have a person and there's an issue whether they really like you. And then there's how they talk to you. How they talk to you is like XY. Whether they really like you, we could say is X, and then that mixes with like what they think what their goals are, what they think you want to hear, and so forth. And it might be that they really like you, and how you interpret what they say is accurate. It might be that they like you, and then they say stuff that looks like they like you, and they overlap, right? How things seem to fit matches how it really is. So, another way to put this is after you try to interpret, so their speech to you, what they say to you in a particular instance, is like XY in this case. You're trying to figure out X, which is whether they really like you. And you have to sort of guess based on, you're only like aware, so to speak. I'm using aware in kind of the simplistic term, just a simple meaning of aware. You're aware of what they say. And from that, you're trying to extrapolate or extract X. You're trying to figure out how they really feel about you. What people do, what our brain does without us realizing it, is when we have a goal for something, it'll twist it into like a goal to get a certain appearance, like a certain XY appearance. Like, in other words, if a guy wants to feel attractive, then he won't really, the brain will twist his goal to have a girl actually like him into a goal for the girl to act like she likes him. Do you see? And that's like behaviorism. Whenever we end up with a goal for a person to talk in a certain way or behave in a certain way, it kind of twists into that, when really if we stopped and thought about it, we really wanted them, we might say feel a certain way, but even then we wanted something real going on where they actually like us, or they actually want to do a particular task inherently, or they're fine with it, or they at least intend to do it, versus just telling us they're going to do it, or they're going to do it well, and we feel like we just want them to tell us that they're going to do it well, or act like they're going to do it well, when in actuality we really want them to do it well. As you try to apply this, it's a fairly obvious concept once you kind of work with it a little bit. What's going to happen constantly is, and this relates to the best fit versus matching, you want to try to keep your goals for what you really want your goals to be. You want your objective to be but often, here's what's going to happen, is often there will be no way to know if you actually achieve that goal. So there might be no way to know whether a girl really likes you or whether someone really intends to do a task. And so what your brain wants to do is it wants to know. It wants an answer, right? It wants that fit. It wants that feeling. And so it's going to twist and say, well, we can't know that, so how can we make a goal for something we can't know? So let's just make a goal to be flattered, or to hear what we want to hear, or for a person to behave in a certain way. But this is a massive problem, and because what you'll also do is your own objectives for yourself. Like, people think that they want to make money, but then what they really want to do is feel like they're succeeding, making money. And so they just want the appearance of success rather than actual success. And what you want to do is be comfortable setting goals for things that you can actually never, in a sense, know if you hit, but you still have the goal for it, because then you'll try to understand better and better. Like, think about this. If you have a goal for someone to truly like you, and you keep it from getting twisted into a goal for them just to behave in a certain way, then you'll be trying to understand. You'll be thinking about your own actions. You'll keep on trying to you focus it then on what you do know, and there's certain things you can know about how you can act where it's more likely in reality that people will like you. If you act congruently, if you act respectfully, right? If you don't act passive aggressive, if you don't act two-faced, then isn't that going to make it more likely, or however you want to think of it, isn't that going to be a real vector, a real in a good way, like a push or a good type of force on a person liking you? So if my goal is for them to actually like me, then I'm going to want to start adding ingredients that will add up to that. And even if I never know exactly for sure if they like me, it's clearly more effective in life to keep stacking ingredients that I do know they're going to make sense for that, including wanting to correctly interpret feedback for them, including wanting to genuinely hear and communicate to them in a way that they feel comfortable if there's things that I'm doing that they don't like, or there's things that they'd like me to do. I still might not do those things, or I still might not stop doing those things, but I want to hear it, and I'll take it into account, right? And then if I'm able to genuinely listen to a person, they don't feel threatened and judged, and they're more likely to talk to me honestly, then it's more likely that that's another vector in the right direction that I'm stacking on them liking me. So I want my goal to be, I want to be comfortable having goals for things that I might never know in a certain way, because by having the goal there and not having it just be goal for like a feedback or an appearance, or for it to seem like I achieved the goal, then I'll keep doing things that are more effective, and it'll make sense. And I'll also not be in a rush, and I won't just be trying to fit something, to force things in. So you see how much more effective that is? And that's what I mean when I said about behaviorism. Or this idea for self-image. People want to feel like they're like a good person, or they're doing pretty well in life, because they don't realize they can actually go for the win. They don't realize they can go for perfection. You want to go for perfection, not for being a good person. You don't want to leave the world a better place than you found it. What kind of crap is that? How the hell are you supposed to know that? Right? Think about it. Better if the world's crappy then it's easier to leave it better than you found it, right? I mean, for the most part. That's a goal to lose, right? To like lose but feel like maybe you won somehow by redefining things in a pathetic, watered down way. So any kind of goal to leave the world a better place or to be a good person or to be intelligent or whatever is crap, utter crap. It's just your brain trying to twist something that you can easily fit, right? All you have to do is just make some crap up, right? Come up with your own standards of why you're better than other people or you did a good job in life. Right? Everyone at their deathbed can like justify why they did a pretty good job, or probably nearly everyone. All they just come up with their own standard of how they do. Oh, I had a couple kids and blah blah blah. Right? They turn out to be doctors or lawyers or whatever. Right? So go for the freaking win. And you said, well, what if I can't? What if I can't win? You can't know you can't win, and that's plenty. Do you think going for the win isn't going for getting rid of all the bad ideas in your mind going to be helpful? What are you going to try to keep some of them? What do you want to have a goal to have some bad ideas? Remember, a bad idea purely hurts you and other people. That's it. It does nothing else but hurt you and other people. How many of those do you want? You see how easy when we go for matching? All these things are just dead obvious once we look at life in terms of matching. And yet it's like night and day. If we look at it in terms of best fit, things that are obviously helpful and good look bad and unhelpful. If we don't realize that we're like a fish in water with just this best fit thing, like that's the only thing that can happen. And so culture, talking to people, everything about how people are supposed to interact and all the cultural rules, they're all based on this idea that we can't know what's true. Right? We're not supposed to talk about politics, religion. I talk about all sorts of things in alchemy that are supposed to be totally off the table. I say all sorts of things that I'm not supposed to say. But all those rules are based on the assumption, without realizing it, that best fit is all we can ever do. So then whoever is more offended is right? Then no one can really know about God or what religion is right, as if we can't know that a religion that states that you want to subjugate and oppress everybody that doesn't agree with you, we can't know that's wrong, that's valid. Are you kidding me? Of course that's wrong. That's a political ideology of when to use violence, right? Like politics about when to use violence. So if a religion involves the subjugation of all people, then that's wrong. That's false. That's bad. I won't name that religion because I don't want the peaceful, wonderful, valid members of that religion to kill me. But I mean, how hard is it if you're just going for what matches rather than best fit? But the rules are all best fit. Is everyone's getting offended by each other? I don't mean in alchemy. I just mean this is how people interact, right? And we're supposed to avoid all these things and stuff. Like people talk past each other all the time. That's what I saw with the evolution, creation, intelligent design debate. They just talk, write books, and all they'd ever do is convince their own followers to be more right. Same thing with Republicans versus Democrats, right? Again, I don't think that they're the same. I think that there's a clear difference and one's preferable. Once you realize that what you're trying to vote for is the lesser of two evils, literally. And as soon as you look at it in terms of which one's the lesser of two evils, it's a no-brainer. Once you're trying to get saved through who you vote for, or vote your conscience, what the hell is that? Right? Our consciences are all screwed up. People's conscience tells them that all kinds of crazy things are okay. Right? That Abraham Lincoln's a good man. That incinerating young girls is wonderful. No, you just look at it. You look at it in terms of importance. What's the objective? Impact. What are the more important things, positions that really have an actual impact on people's lives? And then you look for the lesser of two evils. And then it's easy as heck to pick the right one. No brainer. But yeah, all these things are supposed to be not talked about because the idea is that again, we can't know what's true. When everything's best fit, again, your brain can't know what's true if truth means matching. It can only know what fits. That's why we need safe zones and safe spaces, right? Trigger alerts in college campuses. Something might make them feel like their worldview doesn't fit perfectly anymore. Oh my gosh. So, again, another thing that seems to fit is it seems obvious that we're our mind, right? If our mind gives us a thought, it seems obvious it came from us. But it didn't. It came from our mind. It seems obvious that our mind is us and that we can change. But no, you can't change. It's the simplest thing in the world to understand you can't change. I explained that last time. If you change, you no longer exist. Something else is there. That's simple and obvious once you're looking for matching. But when you're looking for fitting, it seems simple and obvious, but it's wrong that you can change. Of course you can't change. Again, it's utterly moronic to think you can change when you just look at it in terms of matching. Obviously, something that changes isn't the same thing, and obviously you keep referring to yourself as the same thing, as the same word, right? Me. You're not like, oh, I just came into being this very second. Oh, I just came into being this very second. But if you could change, that's how you'd have to think. But you don't think that way. It doesn't match, does it? And so forth. So there's plenty of like just functioning normally in life and doing your career and so forth where people can get by on a best fit basis, but then there's all these places where it doesn't match. And that people fall down big time. And in reality, I can testify to you that by looking at things this way, letting answers fill themselves in, being comfortable with not knowing, right? You have to be comfortable with not knowing. That means not rushing, right? Not feeling like you need to force the answer, like you already know. To do alchemy, I had to be comfortable with the fact that I didn't know what I would say on the webinars. I come up with something, but it might not be optimal. And how could it possibly be? I don't even know I have no idea what's optimal, right? You can shoot for it to be optimal without really knowing, once like I've talked about. Because then you just try to figure out what do I know about what's optimal, and you do that. And I might not come that close, but by shooting for what's actually optimal, and letting go of feeling like I have to know it, the minute I'm like, oh, I'll have to know what optimal is, or I have to know what I'm shooting for exactly, then it might need to be twisted into something that is appearance based. And if that seemed like it conflict with anything else I say, you just think it through, and you'll figure it out. It doesn't. All right, a nice little neat hour and a half. And that, I guess, is alchemy, but I gave you the key there. So we're all set. And that, I didn't know this would all come together. It didn't come together for me until today to realize this clearly, that this is what how I should explain it, just as this one thing. Of course, it's been clear enough that I've basically said everything I said today before, but there's still something about the clarity that's quite new to me and probably new to you guys. So excellent. All right, wow, do I appreciate you guys so much. We're in great shape, and we can certainly talk to each other as we wrap up here. But logs are done at least for this alchemy. I'm sure we'll do stuff in the future together sometimes. Just love this what Sean wrote in the beginning. It's Judgment Day for bad ideas. I'll drop the nuclear bomb against nonsense. Okay, let's see what we got here. I'll refresh. I feel like there should be a little bumper music as we end, or like a Pac-Man music. Wah, wah, wah. Excellent. Yeah, James. Excellent. Saw that. So a soulmate is matching. Anything else is best fit. Okay. When it comes to this is a good example of thresholds. When you can't know that a particular person or that you can find a person who's the best person, the exact perfect match for you in the world romantically. So when you realize you can't know that, and you say, well, David, how do you know you can't know it? You'd have to know every detail about yourself and every person to know it, right? How else could you know? Or you'd have to know for sure that a communication from somebody all-knowing was telling you, or something like that. And how would you know that for sure? I mean, and then you can also know that if you don't clearly have a method, even if you have to ask the question, how might I know it? Then you don't have the method yet, right? So I know I don't have the method to know who the most perfect person possible on earth would be to have as a romantic partner. So since you can't, just like with the money thing, I can't know the exact dollar figure, and maybe there's some way I could, but I don't know it. So then I don't know it, right? Thanks, John, for the 10 million. But whenever you can't know, then you look for, is there a threshold? You start to look at the extremes. Well, is this a little bit enough? No. Okay. Is this overkill? Yes. Okay, and you hone in and you focus on what you can know until you figure out, well, okay, I need someone that's just over a threshold of chemistry and where we can reach each other, and we share a vision, and that we'll act on of looking to have win-wins, to make ourselves happy, and to seek understanding, right, about that, not just try to confirm our own beliefs, like just fitting and not trying to understand things, and just getting that over a threshold. As a side note, by the way, I think that this just might be interesting as a note to kind of expand your thinking or give another angle. I think that the reason for marriage is actually to I think like the world is one big set of metaphors and examples to understand God better in a sense, and understand relating to God. You could say each other, but it also relates to understanding God fundamentally and our relationship with God, and then how to be happy. It's all different aspects of the same thing. But marriage, I think, is about sticking with somebody who's imperfect. Because what does God have to do with us? So we understand God by staying with a romantic partner, even when they're not perfect. And of course, we're not either. I'm not speaking of my wife, of course. But you see, fascinating. And so when people want to ditch it because, well, I could find something better somewhere else, then we miss that aspect of it. So that's just an interesting angle on things to consider. And I'm not saying I know that for sure. I'm just giving you, it's something to consider. I know it's interesting to consider for me. So a soulmate is and so you match over a threshold. You match exceeding a threshold, right? Exceeding a threshold is one thing, and doing so in reality is another. And if they match, right? If you're over the threshold, that's one thing matching another. A soulmate is just a description used properly. The idea of a soulmate is one of two. It's a description of someone over the threshold, or it's a fictional idea that might be true, and it might be fun to believe. I kind of enjoy believing it. I kind of enjoy believing that maybe I've known my wife in previous lives. I'm not saying we have such previous lives or that there's multiple lives on Earth or not, but I don't know that there aren't. It's fun to think, but I don't believe that it's true. I believe that, I don't know that it isn't true, So you could say, I don't know this person isn't my soulmate. So why don't you can stipulate they are, and what does that mean? You're not assuming it's true that they are. You just act as if it's true and think as if it's true until and unless there's an important reason not to. Yeah, so there you go. I switched from best fit to matching a few years ago. That gives you the assurance of getting the real deal. Excellent. Perfect. And then you want to do that just comprehensively. Right, perfect. Right, that's an excellent rant, Mike. 10 million mils is your new name. Thanks. Well, that's wonderful. That's terrific. Oh, can't see how many zeros that is. One. Might have the zeros off. But then, yeah, we got the 10 million from Mike. Matched paired analysis. And just make sure you don't twist what I talked about here into something that people are probably already doing, that you've been already doing perfectly, unless you never feel bad and understand everything, like to have no wrong ideas and so forth. If you have, that's great. But I'm not asserting that I have. This is even new clarity today for me to understand this better. So just be careful about taking what I said and forcing it into the best fit thing as a kind of circular, right? They're both a spiral. The best fit spirals downward and protects itself, and the seeking understanding properly with matching, that makes it easier and easier to do that. Matt wrote, best fit implying importance, feedback, goal, implying another objective the brain has. Fucking brilliant. Excellent. Yep. Appreciate that. See, proof that I read it as I go. Yeah, the importance and the goal thing, right? Isn't that fascinating? Where we need to know what the goal is, the objective is, in order to determine importance. There's no such thing as matching importance or until we identify the objective. And that also means that if we have multiple or a blurry objective, then importance will necessarily be blurry to that degree too, which will have whatever drawbacks it does. But does that mean we rush or feel bad because we don't have a clear objective? No, it means we just move back one step, ask the question, how do I get clarity on the objective? Do you see? That's how it works with questions. If you don't know the answer, you don't fret or screw the whole thing up again by deciding to rush that one. Just keep asking a more contextual question. How do I go about figuring that out? How do I find the right question to ask? You see? Step back one question, step back one question, if you need to, until you get a foothold, and then you can build up from there. The ultimate, a person's matched offer of themselves. Excellent. Sean wrote, so is it safe to say that we open a space in our consciousness? It's not necessarily a space in our consciousness field, by the way. And we try to fill it with what we know and let the information taking the shape and using thresholds law of non-contradiction, stipulations. You're naming the right concepts, and you may well get it well. But if you're asking, just ask. Like, this is a great question, Sean. And all of these questions that you might have now about clarifying about, wait, David, do I get what you mean? I can't answer that in a way. That's like anything I say is going to be like an XY, right? And anything I get from you, I'm not sure it's like an XY. So I can't answer you in a definitive way. I can't make it fit. I can't make you feel like it fits in order to make it match, you know? So there's a point in which I can't do the final things for you. You need to work through it and look, but just ask the question and feel comfortable not having the answer, right? That's an essential part of the whole process. Is you need to feel comfortable having a question that you do not know the answer to without feeling like you're in a rush. You can feel a priority for that question if you want, or you can sometimes feel like it's not a priority right then, or that it's a medium priority, whatever, or it's active or it's not active at that moment. But make sure you can feel comfortable having a question, and don't think that you can know that something matches just because someone tells you that it does. Be careful about all that. Excellent. Yeah, Mike's saying, wow, this is incredible. It's great because we've worked on this for years together, and what I said is still different than what I've ever said before by a little bit. But I think the little bit that means a lot. It means a lot to me, the difference. Today was pretty huge breakthrough for me in a sense, even though, of course, I said a lot of this before. Best fit, making excuses to not be that salesman, matching, knowing I know what the client is going through, and knowing I can help them. Okay, good. As long as you're comfortable starting with a question and making sure that you know when you're saying truth that you're knowing what matches what, right? Always comes down to that. If you can't clearly, if you just feel like, oh yeah, it matches, don't trust it. When it's important. I'm not saying you can examine every idea this minute. You don't need to stop and match everything with everything else in the next 5 minutes or the next day or the next year. But stop asserting that something matches when it doesn't. And remember, it can take a bazillion pieces of information to know if something matches. Remember, I've talked to you about mismatching in the teens, and I told you about how you can distinguish two paintings that are very different. You can tell if something doesn't match in many cases with a tiny bit of information rather than trying to figure out if something complex matches. That's why the law of non-contradiction is so powerful. That's why mismatching is such a massive key or ingredient to the whole thing. Right? You focus on what you can know. You build on what you can know. Sometimes you just go to the extremes and see, well, that doesn't match, and you start from there and you keep building. Again, if nothing else, declutter from the rushing. Feel comfortable having a question and not knowing the answer. And start to identify what matches what, and try not to feel frustrated when it's difficult. If you feel frustrated, that's an indication that you want that answer. You're trying to push that fitting to get the answer. Feel comfortable with saying, I don't know. But then you'll realize, wait, if I think about what I do now, if you go back and re-listen or you think of how I've shown you so many examples of how you can start to parse out aspects of what you know from a situation. Right? I don't know if Abraham Lincoln was a good guy or not. You might say, well, David, didn't you cover that? No, I'm telling you, what I know is that, as far as I can tell, somebody who enslaved 100,000 boys and sent them to their death, in many cases, we would call that person a monster. That's easily over the threshold of what we call a monster. I'm not saying I know he is a monster. I'm saying I know we'd call him that. That's over. And why? Because it matches what's clearly over a threshold for me. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm just saying it matches my sense of the common view of things, and things like that. Like, I know that if history that I've seen is correct, then that's something Abraham Lincoln did, right? That's right. So I don't know whether he was a good guy overall or not. I don't judge that. You can't judge whether someone's a good person or not. It's a nonsense question. Is someone perfect? No. Then how do you call them good? Right? Someone said that, right? Which of us is good? It doesn't mean they're bad just because they're not good. Good and bad are not actually, they're not opposite sides of the same slider bar. But we wouldn't say that we admire such a person, presumably, if we wouldn't for other people that match in that general target. Goals and objectives is a perfect match. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but but it seems like you got an insight there from something I said, so good. The limits of the world of reason, constant change makes it harder, almost impossible, or literally impossible, basically, to match. Only a conscious being can define a threshold to define. First nuclear bomb wiping my mind, right? Yeah, like there's plenty of arenas where you can't match things perfectly, but you can do you can match a target, right? Like in the physical world, you can drive your car into your driveway, right? You don't have to match every molecule to every molecule to get within a threshold, to get within a target, you see? To get within a boundary, however you want to think of it. So, so that's how you turn things where you don't have perfect matching. You parse out thresholds, boundaries, and so forth. Thinking in terms of thresholds is a major part of my my thinking. Julie says, I spent 16 years in an amazing relationship where we were constantly looking for win-wins without really understanding it or putting it into words. Absolutely. Right? Again, you luckily had a nice overlap with what fit for you guys, what fit into you guys' model of the world, and what really matched what was right. I was extraordinarily motivated to do things that would be lovely for my partner, she and for me. It was beautiful and much admired by almost everyone we knew. Sadly, she died 4 years ago, but I reckon I'm the luckiest person I know because of that relationship. Wonderful, Julie, and now you know how to duplicate it if you want. To the extent, I'm not saying you should duplicate it, that you should have another relationship or not, but now you know how to even better, right? Because you'll understand it better. You're not relying as much on that approximation, right, of just fitting it, and then you wonder what goes wrong when the other person a new person doesn't fit in with that. That's what happens is people will get things right in life, or they'll have massive success in one arena in life, but they won't duplicate that success in other parts of their life. Or they'll have success, and then they'll try another endeavor that looks similar, and they won't have success. Why? Because they don't understand the ingredients well enough, right? Like I talk about the alchemy, with like not alchemy the series, but alchemy the concept of getting to know the ingredients. When you seek matching and build on what you know, the same thing I've always been saying, right? Law of implication, building on what you know. When you do that, then you'll be able to duplicate your success in new endeavors, in making money, or in other areas of life, and so forth. And I think I've demonstrated that within reason, within a threshold, within hitting reasonable targets. I just hit success everywhere I touch within reason in life. That does not mean that I couldn't have a disaster wipe me out or whatever. But all I'm doing is testifying that this keeps working, and it constantly feels like maybe I'm wrong, because it'll look like I'm making no progress or shooting for the wrong thing, or whatever. And then blammo, it'll be like a miracle the next day, and everything's solved by far better than we thought. And that happens like nonstop. Stay off the R topic, right? Yeah, I did that mostly tonight, right? Joseph Bathy. So best fit in reality doesn't match with base logic. Right. Logic understood correctly, not in usage, people, what they call logic is just like a best fit of logic. Basically, it's kind of sometimes it's on target, sometimes it isn't. But logic should mean keeping the meanings of your words without moving, constant. And then people are unable to do that because their basis for using words isn't of the nature that they can't equivocate. And I may do a separate series on words where and how to use them and how to think with them properly. I'm going to need some more things to fill themselves in so I can explain it as well as I want to. And I'll probably do it on recording, so there's not like a time when I have to show up to do it. But then I might do a Q&A on it, like that's live. I'll probably go more to like recordings about topics and Q&A live in the future and things like that. That'll let me let things fill themselves in without a timeline with the monologue type of thing, and then just in discussion. It's more conducive. Obviously, that has to be done live, and there's great benefit. I just got back. What did I miss? I'll have the replay up fairly soon. David Mills, you're smashing is smashing. I love that. That's great. Thank you. Andre said, hashtag boom David Mills, since the early alchemies with goalscaping combined with matching and the mind. Oh, Mike Long was saying he hoped that I would expand on goalscaping. Let me say this. By thinking, remember what I said about X and Y and how I'll try to look, but you have to look, all right, I'm going to sound like a Kane or, sorry, that's from kung fu, whatever. I'm going to sound like a guy from a kung fu movie for a second. You have to be comfortable with like, I'll explain this, but like looking without looking, where you're looking like you're looking for something that you literally can never see directly, but you keep that as your thing that you're trying to understand, or in one sense look at, another sense you're not actually looking, but it's something similar. The people don't focus on the goalscape, the vectors on people's minds, like the things that are pushing on a person. Like if someone lives at home and their parents are interacting with them, then that's probably going to be a vector keeping them from buying OMG in a lot of cases, right? Because their parents would probably criticize it, right? That being aware of vectors like that, or when I talked about mind reading, on, I think again it was number 21, you're thinking about the different vectors on some of the different things that would be affecting their goals, what their romantic situation is, what their financial situation is, what their self-image is that's important to them, what important things they identify with that they want to keep up as standards and norms, what the people that they would be looking at as peers are, because that would be an indication of what their standards and norms would be, which would be an indication of how they want to appear to others and convince themselves that they are. When you're looking for that, and you can't see it directly, right? And you'll never see it. This is, again, you have to be comfortable with not knowing. In order to know some things, you have to be okay with not knowing others. When in the world of best fit is the only thing, you can feel like you know everything, in a sense, like because you can always pretend you do, or so to speak, without knowing it, right? Your mind can always trick you into thinking that you are sure of anything in that way. But when you're comfortable with not knowing, then you can seek after certain things that you can never know for sure, but it points you in just the right direction. Like imagine if you follow the North Star. You don't reach the North Star, but by following it, you'll stay in a particular direction, right? And if you're in the wilderness, so it's like a little bit like that, like a North Star. If you're looking for someone to genuinely like you, or for someone to genuinely be happy, right? I want you guys to genuinely get this and to genuinely be happy. And I can't ever know that, can I? But there's a way that I keep my mind on that, and so you've seen me demonstrate this, where I'm not looking for feedback in a certain way that I would be, right? Think about what's not here, what's absent. There's a certain thing I'm not asking you guys to give me. I get it. Anyway, but lo and behold, right? If you focus on someone liking you properly, do you think, and you do things like you stack vectors and such and ingredients that would genuinely, presumably cause them to like you more for real, for good reason, right? Like being congruent, respecting them genuinely, caring about trying to understand what's important to them genuinely, things like that. Then don't you think you'll get more feedback over time that they like you than if you were directly seeking the feedback that they like you, right, with behaviorism? Right? It's like taking out a credit card, right? In a bad way. Your deficit spending, if you go for the overt behavior in the moment that they like you, you'll tend to act and think in a way and not add ingredients in a way where they actually won't like you as much over time, right? You'll be more self-conscious, et cetera, et cetera. You'll be wrapped up in yourself. You won't pay attention to what's important for them. You'll try to be a pleaser, where you just accept their offer all the time without even looking to be clear what it is and do what they want to do, but then you resent them. Right? And then you don't pay attention to what's important to you, what's important to them, etc. And so you over time you get less feedback. But for sure, you guys know this because I've certainly acted this way, right? Where I haven't been acting in that way with you guys. Neither regarding you understanding this. I'm not even like, hey guys, tell me if you understand this. Why not? Because you yourself don't know if you understand, right? In a lot of cases, think about it. So in a sense, it would make no sense. 99.999% out of 100 people by 30 webinars would be sometimes asking you guys if you're getting this. And that is appropriate, by the way. In certain teaching, there's plenty of topics I could be teaching where I would do that, because the overlap of best fit to like true matching would be real enough. The overlap would actually be there. Like if I was talking about a very tangible topic, if I was telling you how to register for Facebook and to interact it with a certain website, right, and use those in a clever way. And then if I say, does everyone see how to sign up for this and how to follow these instructions? Give me a 1 if you do, give me a 2 if you don't. That would be reasonable. And so and me myself, I would very possibly do that, right? And it would be a good strategy because it's tangible enough that the overlap is likely to be close or exact, and the information I'll get from it, right, is going to be the overlap of my perception, like what I'll get back from people, and any distortion there is probably going to be less than the benefit, right? So the good overlap will outweigh any kind of little distortion. But with this topic, it wouldn't have made sense, and generally to do that. And the potential for distortion, it would be like if you had a diagnostic test for a disease that was 95% accurate, but that sounds really accurate, but the problem is if you administered that to 1,000 people, 50 of them would get false positives. So maybe, and if only 1 or 2 of them have the actual disease, but then 50 of them think they have it and they don't, that could be a real problem, right? So that's an example of where the distortion in that case would be worse, and you have to have a sense of it. With Alchemy, I made the calculation essentially that the distortion would be much worse in a number of ways, and from a number of reasons. But anyhow, I want you guys to generally be happy, and I want you generally to understand this stuff. And there isn't like a behavior that I can get from you guys to assure me of that. And so instead, I approach things differently. But how I approach it isn't necessarily perfect, by the way, but it's guided by me keeping the goal for that. The objective is that you're actually happy, you actually understand it. When I say happy, not happy with Alchemy, I mean I want you to be happy overall, net in your entire existence. Plus, I want you to understand Alchemy in general, right? Specifically and in general. I had to be comfortable with never knowing that, but just like the very clear example of if you want someone to genuinely like you, if you're comfortable with not knowing that perfectly, then you can look to stack ingredients that'll just focus on that. And you'll act in a way and stack in a way that is truly most effective. And I did that with Alchemy. It doesn't mean that I was the most effective I could possibly be, but that aspect of my strategy was a good strategy, as far as I can tell. So goalscaping. Thank you, and thanks 100 million. You're very welcome, Andres. But you mentioned the goalscaping, and I started to talk about that. So with the goalscaping, the key to perhaps understanding it even more fully, or a key, or maybe the key, maybe a key, is to realize you cannot know the goalscape, your own or other people's, perfectly, but by seeking to understand what you can know about it more and more, right? Figuring out ingredients of it, right? If someone's like I gave you a bunch, right? Potential. If you know they're living with their parents, and then if you talk to them about what that's like, then that'll help shed some light. It won't mean that you know exactly. Maybe you'll even guess wrong, but in general, knowing more about that will be helpful, right? Knowing their relationship situation, their financial situation. You'll get a more and more of a sense of the vectors on that person, which will give you a sense of like what their objectives probably are. And that's where I'm looking, and I'm comfortable doing that instead of just looking at people's behaviors and my behavior and this and that. Because it's more effective to be looking there. But again, in order to do that, you have to be comfortable looking for something that you can't exactly ever find certainty about. Hopefully that'll help with goalscaping. Paulson writes, getting rid of all bad ideas makes sense. That part is crystal clear. The rest of it I'm still trying to figure out. Great. Again, be comfortable with the question. Be comfortable not knowing the answer. I'm going to be repeating that a bit tonight. Let yourself be comfortable not knowing, and ask the question, and just having any foothold along with this Alchemy series, you will inevitably get it and be successful. Just grab onto anything you can. Grab onto, yeah, I want to get rid of all bad ideas. That's it. If you just have that foothold, focus here with me, replays, whatever, work on the stuff I've talked about. It's not about me, but realistically, I've covered ideas that are going to do it for you, right? Of course, you can expand past what I've talked about and so forth. I don't mean focus on me exactly or not, but realistically, get any foothold and keep going through Alchemy and generally looking in these places. They're big enough, these ideas, that they're obviously part of the key parts of the puzzle. Faith, mind, goals, matching, right? Law of non-contradiction, all of these type of talks, the X and XY, all the things that we talk about throughout Alchemy, your offer, that those are such big, the idea of importance, the idea of goodness, the idea of consciousness field, the idea of God, or God's self, like God is an actual entity, not just an idea. All of these things are the property rights, right? They're all big, important things that we haven't really, because they're such big, juicy targets that looking there is going to keep you filled up for a while and get you plenty far. Again, just be comfortable with the question and not knowing all the answers. You've done nothing wrong by not knowing all the answers, and neither have I. And neither have I yet. Oh, that's wonderful, Jennifer. It brings it all together. That rocks. How many? Got the 10 million? Excellent, from Jennifer. I need a rule that we have to put commas in the hashtag 10 million from now on. There we go. I already got it right 25 minutes ago. But I'm kidding. But of course, thank you guys so much. I'm so honored by that. I guess there was that one goal for feedback, but it's not really goal. It was an objective. I do want to get 10 millions. I appreciate that, but because I think that'll help other people, especially, right? There obviously with Alchemy, we need to get other people to start looking at it in order to get them to continue and to get it. So things that help me with getting people started with it are wonderful, and that certainly helps. So thank you. OMG, how does it keep getting better? I'll tell you how. The method that I talked about today and that I've always been talking about. I keep building on what I know, just like you guys do, when you do. But I think you've been doing it plenty. And I build on what I know, and more things fill itself in. That's how it keeps getting better. I don't force myself to feel like I already got it, and so I don't have artificial closure, and so I keep discovering more stuff, and you'd be the same way. And it's amazing how when you let go of needing to force the answer in and just pretend like you have it, then and think that's the only way. And remember, your brain has to do that. It's pretty fascinating to see how your brain needs to do that to function to help you just get along in the world and feed yourself. So you can have compassion for your brain and the tough job it has to do. But then you consciously interact, right? It's a beautiful question to ask. How do I consciously interact with my non-conscious mind? How does that all work? Of course, I've covered that to some degree or a large degree. I've tried to cover it as thoroughly as possible, but I'm still trying to understand it better myself. Something about getting that unconflicted thing, I think, is part of it too. I think there might be even a power to that is shocking. There might be a real massive power to getting to unconflicted. This is just a little bit of a guess that I'm working on now, but I think without the law of implication, without this type of stuff I'm talking about, it only can happen by like a flash of lightning, like Cotton talks about being struck by lightning, because you can't recreate it. You can't recreate an unconflicted mind through the fitting, because the reality keeps screwing with it, right? Like just being certain of stuff, like trying to be certain doesn't, like in the absence of understanding, it only goes so far. And once in a while you might reach that state, but then you'll go back out of it. And people report that sometimes. They report doing amazing things. Very possible Peter walking on water was that kind of thing. And that's maybe what Jesus was referring to with if you believe and don't doubt. But then if you think it through, well, how do you believe and don't doubt? Do you do it by just forcing things to fit and covering your ears and closing your eyes? That wouldn't make sense, right? So then the only way to get to a true unconflicted mind that you yourself can create and in aspects of life that you want to create would be through this method, right, of focusing on what you know, and then you're at least unconflicted about those things that you know, and that might unleash a particular power. And in my life, I mean, boy, do I get crazy results. I mean, it's kind of shocking, right? And that's pure just testimony, right? I'm not bragging. It amazes me. I just constantly am in a state of shock with what happens and what gets resolved, and I'll have these problems. I'm like, crap, how is that gonna resolve itself? And then it does, and it's just amazing. And I get in my car and I can't believe it every day. Or my marriage relationship, I can't believe it. Bryce wrote, David Mills, this week I have a career fair, and as I prepare my resume, I noticed that everyone in school is getting ready to elbow each other for internships and co-ops for engineering firms in a suitor-like manner. Yep. After you've opened my mind, I've calmed down about this rat race. I noticed that some of my classmates and friends from other universities are worrying about it. Terrific, excellent. Right, with everything, you don't have to force it, because once you have to force an answer, we often need to push and shove other people, don't we? Right? Again, people are so scared we can't build roads or that we can't educate kids somehow, or at least raise kids, that we need to extort and force them and do all sorts of stuff. If we let go of the fear of not knowing, right, the fear of the unknown, and embrace it, then that's how we can actually know stuff. And then it keeps on stacking, and the results are unbelievable, what fills itself in. And that'll happen with you, Bryce, with money and everything. Andre says, bless your willingness to help and have a lasting impact for a world by sharing your sage foundations with profound depth, David Mills. You're very welcome, Andres, and thank you for saying that. Pete says, great lesson, David, as always. Total mind blown and forever thankful. You're very welcome. I got a 10 million from Aaron. Maybe another one from Michael Long and Ernie. Oh, I think I might have seen some of these, but great. If I repeated them by accident, that's okay. Sounds good, right? What a triumph. Yeah, please, David, you can't leave us now. We need more alchemy. Thanks, Susanna. As I said, maybe I'll look to have kind of some recordings fill themselves in as they do, and then I am going to probably take a break for a month or so, but then from doing live webinars, but then maybe I'll do some discussion and so forth. Still blurry? No problem. Just find any foothold, ask a question, and then just keep on building on what you can know. Lots of stuff will continue to be blurry in life, right? Like I say, the goalscape is always blurry. But by looking to look there, by seeking to understand that, then we understand, like it constantly helps us in life. We'll understand other people and ourselves and everything. Awesome, kind of speechless now. Wonderful, Adrienne. Need to go back over a few alchemies and look at the matching. Yeah, for sure. I talked about this whole idea of how to know what's true. I mainly talked about it in the teens, right, in what I called phase 2. The teen, like alchemy, like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Or maybe not 10, but, and I understand that teen officially starts with 13, but you get what I mean. I kept missing the matching part and couldn't figure out how you notice different aspects I just didn't see. I need to fortify the reasons to not go back into conscious best fitting. Right, like what we don't need to do, as far as I can tell, we don't need to double down on the best fit, right? Our brain will try to fit things and do what it does. We can embrace it and let it. But we boundary it, we keep on stacking what we do know, and our brain does its thing, but we do our thing and we work together. Right, consciously. And stop thinking about conscious mind, right? You're not conscious of any of your mind. You're conscious of like X, Y in a sense. Like if your mind is X. There is a part of your mind that's activated, your part of your brain or whatever, and then there's certain ways that your brain treats that information. It'll memorize it differently, treat it as important differently. There's certain filters that will only get through while if it's in the consciously activated part of your mind. Could think in terms of activated mind and non-activated. But even then, that's not perfect either. I'm still working on that. That was a little bit of a tangent that might not have made a lot of sense because it's out of context, but whatever. We can have those. Richard says, sometimes you need to do best fit so you can move forward. Well, see, again, we want to, and I do this too, like, and I'm not correcting you here, I'm clarifying something. There's yourself, right, your mind, your body, which is always going to act on the current level of ideas in your mind, right? It's always going to do best fit. So that always does best fit. Just like your subconscious mind does its type of processing, that it does. It works on problems and so forth. But we want all these things to be put in the right position, right? The more you understand about the deepest meta strategies, the more you understand about the interaction between you as a being, your mind, your body, the subconscious processing, the active processing, whatever, then it automatically will put itself in a better position, and and so forth. So so don't worry about your brain doing best fit. Worry about you stacking what you know, right? That'll guide it and boundary it and so forth. We do not always have time for best match. It's not best match, by the way. It's match. It's exact match. Or remember, don't forget the law of non-contradiction. I covered this in the sometime in the teens. The huge key to this is that you can spot things that don't match. You're very rarely going to be able to match complicated things exactly. What you're gonna do is start to notice what doesn't match and go from there, because you'll know that. And you never have time for matching. You're always playing catch up. The present and the past are basically already over by the time that you can reflect on them. So it's you kind of always and never have time to seek understanding. You can never seek understanding about what just happened or what seems to currently be happening. What you're doing is you're using what's currently happening to seek understanding that'll elevate the ideas in your mind for the future. So maybe that helped to clarify something again. But all of this you'll come to yourself. You just ask any question that'll give you a foothold, and you continue from there properly. Be patient and build. Bryce said this Alchemy series pushed OMG to being the most valuable course in human history. Well, thank you. This knowledge I've sought is worth more than the U.S. BRIC nation's GDP combined. Thank you so much, Bryce. That's awesome, and I can't disagree. Melissa said, I've been stuck for a long time because I was looking for the absolute perfect way out of the situation I'm in. It wasn't until I let go of that I got things moving again and moved out of the stagnant place, right? Thresholds, exactly. Boundaries, thresholds, hitting a target without having to hit a bullseye. If you have to hit a bullseye, you have to, right? Like, whatever the target is you have to hit, based on the situation, you have to hit it. But you don't need to hit it something smaller than that. So you can, remember I say you can keep stepping back with questions. You ask the question, well, what is the target? And you say, well, maybe I can't even know what the target is exactly. You could say, well, how do I just get a good enough idea of the target, or whatever. You can just leave a buffer, right? You can make a target where you're sure that the real target is inside this, right? You can see that with money pretty easily. You can see that with a relationship pretty easily. You could say, well, for sure, if I find a potential significant other that has the following qualities or interacts with me in the following way, then that's definitely good enough. And then you can maybe shave things off from there. If that's it's too hard to target, whatever, you can maybe realize, okay, wait, I actually don't need that thing, or whatever. But even what I just said is going to be obvious once you relax and think about targets, right? If you don't know the exact target, you say, well, let me get what's the threshold where at least I'm for sure over the target, and then go from there. Or within the target. Actually, it was the day I joined this course, and I'm not just saying that. It was the move I needed to make because I needed to do something. This confirms perfectly what I was feeling. I can totally relate, so grateful. Yeah, that first one, right? Or maybe it was before you joined the course, but yeah, I mean, it was really challenging, right? That first Alchemy talks about playing to win, right, and foundations and such. Andre says, blown away time after time. Thanks once again, David. You're so welcome again, and never get sick of appreciation. Terry said, thanks, David Mills. Right? In a sense, appreciation encapsulates all of the good, right? Like, good is basically appreciating something, right? Like that something hits a target, that it matches a receptor in your mind, right? And appreciating that. So it's very possible to think that all good comes out of appreciation, perhaps. I kind of came with that in the spur of the moment, but that might work in a certain way, kind of a general way. John Susko says, married for 30 years now, pretty sure my wife knows I'm imperfect. Stay with me anyway. That's terrific, John. I need a cigarette. Matt said, my mind stopped in its tracks. This is like meditation, or like a stop button, or reset, or realign. I feel so humbled to feel how much I don't know, and at the same time, there's no rush to fill in an answer. I rush all the time to fill in answers. Beautiful. And she asked the question, how do I end the rush? And then when you ask that, you say, well, what's one more thing I can do to end to reduce the rush, or to understand about reducing the rush, right? You can always make things more bite-sized. You can always step back in context, and so forth. And then there's certain things that you'll just learn that you know. Many that we've covered in here, just the usual, all kinds of things about your offer that you'd rather not have it imposed on you. You'd rather understand it better, about who you are as a conscious being, right? Property rights, zillion things that you can know. And those you can always fall back on. They're there, and they'll stay there, and they'll be part of the ingredients on other things. But otherwise, and that, like, the foundation will get filled in more and more, so you don't have to step back quite so far and figure so much out each time. But still, to the extent that you need to step back and ask a more meta question, do so. Or more bite-sized part of what doesn't match, a more extreme thing that doesn't match. Like, okay, at least I know it's not this. I don't need to make $10 million. Maybe 5, I don't know, but at least if you don't need 100 or 10 trillion, it's something, and then you go from there. Anything that's a foothold is all you need, and then you keep going. The understanding that life is rigged to win is one of the most profound things for me. Just like a totally fabric tearing for me. Beautiful. It is for me too, just so you know. It's totally a game changer for me when I realized it. And I realized I could stipulate it. And it also makes perfect sense because of all the things that I have filled in about God existing and why things would be the way they are. It would have to be rigged to win if it was at all possible, and I think it is. And I don't know it isn't, so I might as well work on that it is. And if you think about how you'd act, if you think it's rigged to win, then you'd always you'd act optimally, so why wouldn't you stipulate it, right? Just like with playing a computer game, if you act like it's rigged to win, that's good. And if there's any drawbacks you find to doing so, I mean, I could maybe think of some, if depending on how I frame the question, then you just boundary off those drawbacks. I have a much calmer sense about the future now, David. You've really empowered me and probably us. Definitely not feeling helpless anymore. Wonderful. That's terrific. Right, because you can always seek understanding. No one can stop you from doing that. Bryce says, I swear, being a teenager who struggled with self-esteem, I cannot thank you, David, for enough, I presume, for allowing me to have these life-fulfilling lessons of alchemy. I hope to go through the rest of these and never forget them. Thank God I have alchemy for the rest of my life. Yeah, you're very welcome, and absolutely, and we've all, boy, the self-image thing is so expensive, so difficult, so emotionally difficult, draining, and costly. Being a 43-year-old, I can attest to the power of alchemy. That's wonderful, Matt. That's my age exactly as well. Although I try to convince my brain that I'm 26, right? It's supposed to be healthier. I'm glad you have seen the light and have a clear vision of how this can make a big difference in your life, Bryce. Blessings, man. Oh, that's so nice. Oh, that's so nice. And thanking Ty Lopez. I will have to pass that along to him. That's so great. I'll pass that along. It's great when we can tell an affiliate, you know, how they've helped someone specifically and how they're appreciated. Then, of course, it helps more people be able to come to alchemy. Kyle says, how relatable is threshold to action potential? It's very similar to the enzymatic activity diagram, if you know that one. I won't get too much into it. Lock and key model, just it's very applicable. It's basically the same thing. It's just an illustration or an exact physical illustration of it. So it's a great analogy. And just you can think about it yourself to make sure it fits in every way or whatever. But I use analogies, to teach. Don't use analogies to discover about something, because the nature of an analogy is that it's not exactly the same, right? But you can use it to ask questions. So you can use an analogy to teach and explain, because you can use it to teach and explain because presumably you know what you're explaining about and you understand the analogy, and so you can say how it's similar and how it's different. But you can also use analogies to ask questions, just like if you're talking to a potential client or you're about to tomorrow and you're thinking of your sales presentation, or if you're writing a sales letter or whatever, you can think about an analogy would be when you've talked to someone in the past, right? And you use that to ask the right questions. You don't use it to close your mind off. You use everything to develop better questions, and then you win from there. Robbie says, the last alchemy really hit home a lot of things. Thanks, David. Had it on repeat a few or 5 times. I presume you mean number 29 then. That's terrific. I was really happy with how that came about. And that's kind of what I mean when sometimes at the end of alchemy, or I'll say, wow, that was really great. It's because I myself didn't know how it was going to come together, right? So I'm just looking at what filled itself in myself. I don't think I am my mind. And so when it comes up with something good, I appreciate it just the same as when you guys do. So you're seeing me do that in real life, real time sometimes. Because I just don't know, right? And I don't force it, like I don't just come up with a structure, like the idea of coming up with my own test and giving you the answers to it and then saying we all get an A, right? It's kind of funny. That's an example of the best fit thinking. Still swimming upstream with your ideas, but slowly working on it. I'm confident I'll get there no matter what things my mind puts into my consciousness field. Yeah, and Robbie, I had you in mind with this best fit thing, and only because I know that you've had this question about. You've been one of the people kind of saying to me, could you help me better understand how to know what's true, right? And I appreciate that. And so I had you in mind. And so really just stare at this best fit versus matching thing, play out scenarios of how one type of thinking would lead and how another would, and even how they both make sense in certain ways. And that can really help you. I think this will give you a major key to unlocking things or smashing your limitations. Hey, David, I got a question about, Mahir writes, I got a question about passive aggressiveness. Even though it might be ideal in terms of dealing with people and getting certain results out of people, The other options don't seem nearly as viable either, such as purely passive or aggressive. Oh, sure. I mean, for certain, you don't want to be passive or aggressive. Like, passive and aggressive are automatically one and the same. That's why I talk about it. Like all people do is slide in between different places on there. Almost like the ideal is like in the middle, but not really. I mean, sometimes you're more aggressive, less aggressive, but it's all about getting a particular response or behavior from people. It's all about the goal for the X, Y. And then it's some, people be passive until they explode and then they get aggressive. Or sometimes people will be aggressive more commonly and then they're not passive. And that can be fine. At least they're not so two-faced, right? But you want to be a respectful alchemist, like I talk about in a couple of the things. I don't know how much I can rehash that here, but Mahir says, excuse me, excuse me, I better just get a quick glass of water. Mahir says, I read a book about clear communication, and it states that you got to create a safe environment first with people in order for them to feel like they can open up and say what's on their mind. Right, that's reasonable. However, it does feel like you got to have a certain amount of aggressiveness to push for things you want to get done. If there's ever, aggressiveness can fill itself in. Think about it. It might be kind of a weird way to put it, but like when you're looking at goalscape, when you're genuinely seeking, when you have your mind on an objective properly, if it's obviously right to have a posture or a tone that's even energetic, kind of pushing forward in a certain way, if you're not just looking for a behavior, or if that behavior will help get momentum, it'll fill itself in if it's right. That's part of being a respectful alchemist. I will talk aggressively sometimes, and I'll also be what could look like passive sometimes, because someone might do something where I'll have a question about how to get something different to happen in the future, right? So in that way, it looks passive, right? But I have a question, and I'm being an alchemist as normal with the question. And I respect them in my mind in general, including always their property, right, and their time and so forth. And including not judging them overall as a person, because we can't know enough to judge them as a person. That's an example, another example of embracing not knowing. We cannot know what someone should have already figured out, right? The world's full of bad ideas that get installed in us when we're an infant. So how am I supposed to judge somebody else what they should have already figured out about those bad ideas? We don't do that as a whole. I'm not even doing that about Abraham Lincoln or Hitler or anything, right? So that can help. So don't worry. I wasn't trying to tell you don't be passive, don't be aggressive. What I was trying to say was you focus on being a respectful alchemist, and an alchemist just means you approach things. You start with a question. You're comfortable with not knowing. You're comfortable with not pushing by default, where everything's about X, Y. It's about the behavior or something that's wrong. You keep your objective in mind. You keep deficit spending in mind, where if you just push now, maybe you have to push them again and again, and you get more and more resistance. When you encounter resistance, you generally want to focus on your efforts on dissolving the resistance rather than swimming upstream directly against the resistance, but not dissolving it, but just fighting it without dissolving it. You don't usually want to do that unless there's an emergency, in which case you may need to. But all of that becomes clear as you build on what you know. We're always going to all come to the same conclusions that are correct, right? Because the correct answers are correct for all people. So perhaps that'll help. Let me see. I can read this example you gave. You're right. You wrote something great. I guess I have to be comfortable not having the answer to how to get them to follow my rules. And you wrote that 41 minutes ago. But that's so right. Like, a lot of this is like a lot of the questions people might ask involve, well, I don't know this answer. How do I get it right away? Well, the way you get every answer is alchemy, ask the question plus alchemy, right? And there's plenty of times when you're just not going to get people to do what you want. I don't know how to get people to stop doing taxing right now, right? I have to be comfortable with that. Like, if I'm like, oh, I don't get alchemy because I haven't ended taxation, that wouldn't make any sense. Just because you don't have, again, just because you're not omnipotent, this is obvious when I put it this way because I'm putting it to an extreme that you can know. But think about how this logically relates to an inherent fallacy in some questions. Totally fine. I'm not in any way pushing back against you asking questions. I don't mean you specifically here, I mean everybody. But I'm further giving you a solution to your questions that you're asking. So none of the subtext of this is you shouldn't or you're wrong for asking a question. I'm just showing you an understanding that'll help. So the fact that you're not omniscient, all-knowing, or all-powerful is not an indication that alchemy doesn't work, right? And so the fact that you haven't solved certain problems in your life, especially if you haven't gotten other people to do certain things, doesn't mean that you don't understand alchemy or that you're doing anything wrong. There's plenty of people that are not doing what I want in life. It doesn't mean that I'm fundamentally wrong or ignorant or doing anything wrong. The fact that I have bad ideas left in my mind doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong, right? I can't force them all out instantly through an act of will. I could just keep seeking, right? And maybe I'm seeking optimally, maybe I'm not. But the better I understand seeking, the better I'll seek optimally, right? So you step back one with the question. But just in case I can give you something practical for this, and it can spark all kinds of things, I'll read it. So for example, I have some first-year university students as tenants. And I've been trying to apply things I've learned, such as not anthropomorphizing them as a group. Excellent. That's brilliant. So you added in something that you know. That's awesome. That's always going to be helpful if you stop treating groups as individuals that can make decisions. They can't. And as a matter of fact, by doing that, you will reduce people's individual responsibility, and you'll have a much harder time influencing people if you think of them as a group instead of individuals. So excellent. Or, going on to say what Mahir wrote, or being more lenient with them so as to make them more happy. And that's a fine poke, right? That doesn't mean you're being passive. Like trying something out, don't confuse that. Like we're always going to act some degree of passive and some degree of aggressive by one way of looking at things. Like the very fact that you're interacting with somebody means that to some degree you're kind of forcefully communicating that you want something to happen right now, and to some degree you're not doing that, right? So there's some way in which you're always acting some degree passively and some degree aggressively. But the answer isn't in like asking, do I be more passive or more aggressive in life or in this situation is not going to give you the answer that you're seeking. You're automatically going to act a certain amount of passive, a certain amount of aggressive. It's much like saying, should I best fit? Should I do the best? Should I do the best I can? Should I respond the best I can given the ideas that I currently have? Well, you don't have to ask whether you should. You are. There's no way out of that. You're always going to respond at the level of your current understanding and ideas, right? So asking, like, it's the wrong type of question in the sense that it's just not very productive to ask, should I be more passive, should I be more aggressive? That's what people normally ask without realizing it, right? Intuitively, people are only asking, where do I slide the slider bar, more passive, more aggressive? Instead, you bypass all that, seek understanding, seek ingredients that are good, like if I wanted someone to like me more, I would want to be respectful always, and basically I would want to be an alchemist. And you can even leave off respectful. That just helps clarify alchemist. Part of being an alchemist is being respectful because it's something you can know. The more I build on what I know regarding people liking me, or a particular person liking me, the more they'll like me. If instead I ask, should I be more passive and should I please them more, or should I be more aggressive in getting what I want, or asking them what they want, that's basically the wrong question. Or it might be a reasonable poke to ask that, but it misses the point for the most part. Fundamentally, you're doing alchemy. If in the process of doing alchemy, you ask questions like, should I be more passive, that's okay. But again, you focus on what you know. Normally, you can't know. If you can't know whether to be more passive or more aggressive, usually, directly, then you build on what you can know, and that'll fill itself in. So you said about making them more happy. However, they haven't been cleaning the house like I want them to. So where does the line come when trying to figure out, like a detective, what bottlenecks are and why they're not cleaning and realizing and disrespecting my rules? Where is the line? Right, so one of the things to remember is you need to figure out what you're going to do. Boundaries are not for other people. This might be a little hint that you haven't realized. Boundaries are regarding what you yourself are going to do, not what other people are going to do. So you can think about that when you're thinking about what you're going to do regarding the cleaning. Where's the line where you choose to have a boundary they will not cross? You can't choose to have a boundary that they won't cross. You can choose to have a boundary where if they do such and such, or then you're going to need to do such and such. Or you don't even have to tie it to what they do exactly, but you might have to. But you might say, for example, that the place needs to be clean at a certain time, or you're going to have nobody. You're going to start with new tenants, and you could say, plus, I'm not going to clean it. So if you were to say to them, I'm not going to do cleaning, and if it's not clean to this threshold, this type of target, whatever that is, every Sunday, if it's not reasonable, if there's large pieces of food around by my own judgment, then I'm going to ask you guys to leave. And here's roughly what I mean. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to be ridiculous about it, but this is about what I mean. And if it's not, and I'm not going to be cleaning it. And if it's not, then I have to ask you guys to leave. And that would be an example of a way to handle it, potentially. As long as that's what you want, or you accept it. If you don't want to ask them to leave because you'd rather clean and have the money than clean and have the money and accept the whole thing. Just like with anyone, sometimes you wish that you had what you had plus the people were different on top of that, and you can't get that. You might be able to get to that over time, but you might not. And right now, you have to accept people the way they are. Or not. You either don't accept them, you accept them, but you can't both accept them and not accept them at the same time, is what I'm saying. Dave Keyes writes, these concepts have rendered incredible things in my relationships with people and my ability to help them. In my business, I still seem to be working my way backwards to knowing what is true, and I'm not there yet, or perhaps not willing to go there because of a reduction in income, and it's a real problem. Well, that's probably it, Dave. Maybe what you're doing is you are artificially restricting yourself, like I talked about last time. You're too afraid to go through a valley that you won't get off your local peak, and then you need to decide: do I want to stay on my local peak, or do I want to potentially go through a valley? With money and with people, you sometimes won't actually go through a valley, but you need to at least be ready to risk it. And if you're not, then by logic, you're staying on your local peak. And then don't be conflicted about it. Either be okay with the potential value or don't. I have to face this with OMG. If there's certain types of affiliates that we don't want, or if there's certain promotions we don't want to do for certain affiliates, or if there's certain pressure I don't want to put on myself or Mike or anyone else, for example, then I need to be comfortable with potentially not hitting certain sales numbers. Now, in being comfortable with that, I might hit double the sales numbers, and that's what often happens. And there's times when I haven't been willing to go through a valley right then, potentially, and so I've pushed it and I've done things where it's unpleasant for myself or others. I'm getting to a point now where I'm not so willing to do that, so I'm willing to have lower sales numbers potentially. Probably won't happen. I'll probably do better than ever next year. But I'm getting to where I'm willing to potentially go through certain valleys. But the only way to get off my local peak is to be willing to go through those valleys. And it's a real choice. It's not obvious necessarily. But then you have to, and then one of the things you can do is you can save or work yourself to a place where you can weather a valley one way or the other. Or it's a self-image thing, or it's a talking to people in your life. I had to talk to my partners in my business and say, I want you guys to be comfortable with if we make some less sales. We'll probably do better than ever, but if we're not, we're not. Because there's certain standards that I want to start having in place. And then I would get agreement from them or I wouldn't. I happen to get agreement from them, so it's okay. If I didn't, I'd have to go from there and decide what to do from there. Right? So that can help you. I think that probably gave you an insight, or a part of it. I don't mean that you now know the perfect answer, but that probably that should be helpful. An alchemical ingredient, that should help. So the basic idea is to ask until we match the right answer. Right, and keep in mind that the right answer might just have to hit a pretty fat target. You don't need to figure out super complicated things in life to be happy, wealthy, have wonderful relationships, and so forth. Right? There might be plenty of foods that my wife really appreciates me getting her for dessert or for like just dinner or whatever. I don't have to find the most perfect food out there. I just have to look in such a way that once in a while or every few days or when it becomes important to her, that I figured out, and then I get lots of points for doing that for pretty, not too hard work. And then I never have to do the hard work. Hello, Michael. An era ends now, right? Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be something for me. A new beginning starts. Michael Longroth has been an utter life-transforming series for me. Incredible. Wonderful. Haha, perfect soulmate, me, myself, and I loved it. Rule number 1, love yourself. Right, I agree with that, Michael, about rushing into relationships. You want to be comfortable with being single, and that can help you. Basically, the point of being comfortable with being single is just so you're not in a rush, right? It's the same exact thing over and over again. Being in a rush means you can't let the proper answer fill itself in. And remember, the right answer might be able to just hitting a fat target. Can't say that enough. It doesn't mean that there's like some complicated, very detailed answer for a lot of things, or that you're trying to find the person that's best person on earth possible. Then all you'll do is keep jumping around. You don't need to hit a target more than you need to hit it. And if you accidentally think you do, you can take yourself backwards. Wayne says, I've always been a person who shares, and I've always been seeking what to share with the world, and the answer has just filled itself in. Oh, that's wonderful, Wayne. Thanks, and so much love for you, David Mills. You're very welcome, Wayne, and my love to you as well. David writes, this lesson gives me urge to go through all of alchemy again. Perfect. Can't complain about that. With the idea of matching in mind. Very sneaky, David. Genius way to close the series off. 7-0 Mills. That's awesome. That's the 10 million. Matt says, I must need to refresh here, and I'll wrap things up pretty soon. The method of questioning is incredible. So many bottlenecks I've hit in personal and work projects were due to needing an answer, forcing a fit. Absolutely, right? You're going to, as you look back, you guys will all certainly have a sixth sense moment if you haven't already, right? Like from the movie, where you're like, wow, that's what kept going wrong. My God, transformative, right? Letting the answer come in, beautiful. This is just outstanding, no rush. Being comfortable with not knowing, going back another question, right? Contextually, one meta question deeper if you need to. Beautiful. Exactly right, Matt. Perfect. What a great way to summarize it. Rick said, I attended the Landmark Forum, and they taught me that life is empty and meaningless except for the meaning we give it, and that's based on our past history. How do we know the truth if everyone has a different meaning to things? We are meaning-making machines. How does this relate to alchemy? I think I wouldn't even bother trying to figure out how Landmark relates to alchemy and just focus on alchemy. I think it'll just, like it's too much of a cluster of right and wrong ideas, and they just don't have things all right over there, is the bottom line. And so I would just hardly even ask. It's just they're blurry about what's the we that gives it. We experience good without trying, right? I as a conscious being don't just make goodness appear in my conscious field, and neither does God. Neither I nor someone else can just put bliss, ongoing infinite bliss into my consciousness field. So and meaning comes from goodness in our consciousness field. So it doesn't, but then goodness comes from reasons, and one of those reasons is how our mind fits various things. Some people like certain foods, other people like different foods. Some people like some experiences, other people like different ones. So, so it's like a lock and a key with certain pieces of goodness. Plus, some things are just incorrect, and we figure that out through the alchemy process and matching and mismatching. And Landmark, again, they're just not, like, the fact that now that you have alchemy, I'm not trying to compete with them at all. It's not like that. It's just, in terms of just helping you fastest, just ignore everything they said and just look at the answers I've given you. It's not going to make you go faster by trying to find some more right answers with what they said. Now, I do realize that drawing comparisons can help elucidate alchemy answers, so it's very valid. And the question is excellent. I'm never trying to tell you guys that you shouldn't have asked a question. I'm just trying to give you an answer that can help you best, and a little bit enlightening around here. But maybe that can help. But and how can we know truth if everyone has different meanings to things? Easily. I mean, truth is what matches. Plenty of things match. Things that match for all people. This idea that truth is relative is just false. Truth isn't relative at all. Fitting is relative. And whether or not you like a certain fruit is relative to your mind, whether how it fits to your mind, and you could say how it matches to the key and a lock to your mind. But again, it's just they just make mistake after mistake, and I don't even mean more than most. They might get a lot of stuff right, but just let it help you appreciate alchemy, basically. Alchemy mixtures of focus found. If I try to explain all the wrong ideas everyone else has, right, I'd just be here forever. On the other hand, it helps by contrast at some point over time to show. But I'd have to go. I haven't even gone through Landmark. I had some friends that did. Mike attended some meetings years ago. And then they have an idea that we have this script internally. They can help you ask some useful questions, but only after you have alchemy. If you don't have alchemy, then what? You need alchemy basically. And to the extent that you still feel blurry about stuff, it's because you're still projecting and trying to compare to other ideas. Just try to look at these without projecting, without having it be obfuscated by other stuff. It's people that have done that stuff, like Landmark, that often have more problems understanding what I'm saying. And I'm trying to figure out what good nuggets can they get from me, what good nuggets can they get from there. I put in the work and they haven't, is the bottom line. If they tried properly and been properly ruthless and relentless, they would have gotten better ideas. So they've been lazy. I don't mean relatively speaking. It might sound like I'm judging and anthropomorphizing, but you think so, any of the people in Landmark could put the time that I put in and the ruthlessness that I put in and making sure comparing with things that fit? I don't think so. It's about teachers that I'm most kind of harsh. Right? People teaching and saying they have it when they don't. Okay, I'll wrap up here and just kind of read a few final comments. You're very welcome, Jennifer. Says David, thank you so much for the time you dedicated and invested in this series. I find myself applying the method of seeking, understanding, and asking questions, not identifying with my body and brain, evaluating peaks, and having more patience with the process. I have much more to do and know that this series will make all the difference for myself and my family. Excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're very welcome, Jennifer. And of course, nobody needs to fully depend on me, right? It's not like I got everything right or covered everything. But this is, realistically, you want to benefit from what I've done and then launch off from there to a certain degree. It's hard for me to know exactly what I mean by but anyway. But I do want you to not feel overly restricted. Don't get overly restricted by me or overly dependent in a way where you feel like you can't come up with answers that I haven't. You all can come up with clarity and answers that I haven't. And furthermore, there's a certain amount that you have to build for yourself. Because no matter what I say gets mixed, right? It's almost like what I intend gets maybe mixed in my mind. We could say I have to speak it in words. Your mind has to interpret it. You have to get stuff. So you at least have to work backward through that whole process to some degree. There's going to be a best fit overlap with a lot of it where the meaning you get is going to be exactly what I intended, but other times it might not. And still you have to kind of sort through and figure it out for yourself. So don't ever feel intimidated by me. That's a good way to think about it. If you ever feel like anything about, or like we all, like myself, when I read like a Hercule Poirot novel, I know he's going to solve it, so I don't really try to work too hard. I'm working through the answer myself and the logic and, and so forth, right? We might try to guess the answer, but we don't like put out a pen and paper usually and do a whole logic diagram and say, what if this person's lying? How would that affect everything else? Because I know that the answer is going to be revealed. Do your best not to overly do that with me, where you kind of let go because David will, do it for me. So kind of fully take advantage of everything I have, but without letting it restrict you in a way that doesn't make sense. And even that, you can kind of work on what the right meaning of that is. John Ferguson says, I have to build and build and ask, but at least I now have a clue how to do so. Thanks, David Mills, for that. Absolutely. Yeah, and what have I talked about? Decluttering, right? Not rushing, just things like this. The law of non-contradiction. That'll all give you a basis. It'll make it more clearer and clearer for you. And that's why I rebelled with the landmark thing. Whenever you try to think by analogy about this stuff, it just adds clutter, right? Asking, how does this relate to Course in Miracles, right? How does this relate to landmark? How does this relate to whatever? This person's teaching, that person's teaching. It just adds clutter. Decluttering helps clarity. Analogies don't. To the extent that it might help you ask a question, great. But if the question is just, how does this relate to that, then I mean, there's cases where that could help me explain something, but I would need more of a scenario than just, how does this course relate to that course? And yet I fully appreciate the questions about it. I'm just saying that to only to help you, not to try to shut anyone down. Why would I shut anyone down in the last few minutes of Alchemy? Love to be part of a group who really do want to make the world and life a better place. Thanks, David, for making life easier. You're very welcome, and I love being a part of the group too, and having you guys there. Pedro says, hashtag happy. It's amazing insight, perfect match. Thank you. Oh, insight, right, perfect match. Thank you, David Mills. You're very welcome. Chris says, for me, the best alchemy session because you pulled all the parts into a dynamic whole. Kudos. Wonderful. Best for last. Glad I really, I actually put some effort into stepping it up, and not like finishing as strong as ever, and not like in a sense there was some temptation to be like, all right, well, I'll just kind of do some discussion and say what I can say, but then I said, wait a second, let's really light it up on the way out, and I not that I couldn't use willpower to necessarily have the answer fill itself in, but I really extra asked the question and put the focus in to have this fill in, and then it did. And Mike helped with that too, Mike Long, just with his energy and so forth. Jen says, can you give an example of a scenario that should trigger us to check to see if something matches? Yeah, what you're trying to do is look for impact. So first of all, keeping your objectives in mind and thinking what objectives you want will help you to figure out what's important. And then when things don't add up, when you either have a significant success, then you try to look and see, well, why was that, right? And the answer shouldn't be just because you're awesome and you emanated your awesomeness, right? You can see meta ideas of why that was. You can kind of have mid-meta ideas of what you did. And then like the most meta are like the deepest alchemy ideas. But then there might be things like meta to learning that you might have done well, or in a good way persevering. But you don't want to just come to the conclusion it's not only perseverance, because perseverance has to be on the right mountain, right? And then if things go better than you expected, in one sense, when things don't match what you expected, either things went even better than expected, or if they went worse than expected, that's an example. That's a time that there's something there to discover. But the key there is when they're better than expected, you do it too, and don't just decide it's proof that you're so awesome. You may well be, but then there's something to learn there, right? You'll replicate your awesomeness more often and more generally if you look at your unexpected successes where it's even better than you thought. So when things don't meet your expectations in either direction, and then you're looking around for what objectives make the most sense. Generally, your major relationships with people, understanding about deep ideas, and things related to money until you get that taken care of, things related to health until you maybe get that taken care of if necessary. Those are some of the major places to look. And then be looking at what are the bottlenecks and what are the building blocks that I think, and you can think about building blocks because you can imagine, what if I accomplished this result and then I went to use that as a building block? How would it help me? And that'll help you see whether the building block really does help. And then if it's monetization, you can go through and you can think product. That's why I give you product, traffic, conversion, and those are 3 places to look. There's nowhere else to look in that sense, right? And then that gives you a clue to where to look to. And remember, generally you're looking for mismatching. You're looking for, well, what doesn't match, and letting that narrow things down is another example. Or what smaller parts that I can see match. What are some simpler things that I can see if they match? even if you can never match, the whole thing. You can never know exactly what amount of money you want to make. You can never know exactly what product is perfect for you to build or that sort of thing. Presumably, unless you do have a way to know that, in which case, great. But usually the way is you figure out a fat target, a threshold, and you exceed it. Chris says, David, really glad you did the seminar series and shared your clear views. Very foundational and empowering. Also, it was wonderful to meet so many great people, right, in this Facebook threads and so forth, all collected under one roof. I'm going to miss everyone, all of you. Thank you, Chris. It's wonderful. Yeah, it's interesting about the sense of mysterious, Andres. Thank you. Faith says, thank you so much. The journey is just beginning. Wonderful. And I had you in mind, Faith. I know you really wanted to understand the method of knowing what's true, and hopefully this webinar helps with that even further. Mahir says, thank you, David, for all your help, insight, and patience. My life has literally changed since I've been learning Alchemy and LOI. Wonderful. Now the next phase is to use the raw materials you gave us and build, but never in a rush. Well, that's excellent. Uh-oh, I got 100 million. Hashtag 100 million. Thank you, Mahir. Appreciate it very much. Sean says, thank you so much, David. Alchemy mind bent my mind. I need to be comfortable with the fact of not knowing and watch multiple times. Amen to that. Beautiful. Just that one thing, right, about being comfortable with not knowing is kind of ensures your success, right? But for me, alchemy is beyond value because you can't put a value on a method to know what's true. It's just foundational. And I already gave my 10 million away. You already gave me one of those, exactly. You need to build anything in life. You needed to build anything in life. Amen. Judgment Day unfitting. We need to be comfortable, right? Like you're saying, no longer are you going to just do the best fit thing and rubber stamp that, right? Consciously, your mind will do it normally, and that's okay. Your mind does what it does, but then we consciously want to guide it by seeking matching and mismatching and so forth. We need to be comfortable with the fact of not knowing and seeking knowledge. Amen. Mind blow. Thanks to Ty Lopez as well. He brought me into OMG, which is one of the best things I learned in my life. Wonderful, and thanks for mentioning Ty. The Ty Lopez and Mike Long superpowers literally got me here. Excellent, wonderful. Yeah, hugely appreciate Ty. He sent so many people over to us. He's so talented. Rick says, I appreciate your answer, David. Alchemy certainly makes the most logical sense to me. Very grateful for your answers and awesome information that I'll use to build on. Absolutely. And really potentially comparing it to something like that might be an interesting exercise in the future, by the way. But I just don't want it to interfere with you. So that's excellent. I read it. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to express that. The end has come when we must say goodnight. God bless everyone and blessed are you all. Thank you, Michael Moynihan, absolutely. We got the sleeping and yawning Snoopy here. Blessings. Good night, everybody. Take care, all. You're very welcome, Julie, who adds, thank you, David. Wasn't sure how you were going to finish off on a high, given all the amazing stuff that came before. However, I nailed it. All right. Most excellent that it all filled itself in. I gave people fair warning. Remember on my post here, I updated it. Once I had the breakthrough, and I said, fair warning, this moment might be good as well. Dave Keys says, regarding my previous question, I think asking more questions and observing the scenarios implied by that, it becomes clear that you're right about exiting a local peak. I know the following known vectors. Average real estate agents earn $40K a year. My website attracts average or below agents who want to overcome powerful opposition. Sometime it became far less responsive to ranking strategies. The price tolerant doesn't usually I've not match. I have not developed a strong strategy to attract other types of clients. Time to move on to the goal. Yeah, great. Yeah, and you probably developed too much of an image for yourself, right? Of this is what I do. That kind of boxed you in with the real estate. And so, right, it's probably time to go outside of that. And if you have to be comfortable spending less for a little while, even if you don't actually need to spend less, maybe your income will never dip. Maybe it'll skyrocket. But if you can get yourself in your mind comfortable and say, look, I can do this for the next 6 months or whatever, then that can help get you through. Anything that makes you comfortable with the potential valley is critical to get off a local peak, right? And if you're ever wondering why you're stuck, it's because of that valley issue where you have to get comfortable with going through it. I'm not saying you might even, there's some local peaks in life you don't have to bother worrying about, right? They're just kind of unimportant. But if it matters, then that's the key. Sue says, this is such great info. Don't be rushed. Declutter. Mixing my ingredients and searching for understanding. Being comfortable with not knowing the answer. Thank you. 10 million, David. Looking for what matches instead of what best fits. You make OMG more common. Excellent. And it just, that for some reason sparks just a quick thought where, and as you guys I think know, this isn't just a nice sounding theory, right? This is what I put into practice constantly. The struggle has been for me to kind of figure out how to explain it for myself and others even better, and understand it better. But this is all what I've been doing for a long time, and I keep doing it. Little problems, big problems. I often can't tell you about a lot of the examples just because they involve real people, and so forth. And my business involves OMG, it's kind of public. I can't discuss a lot of things that go on, but it's amazing that the way this method just keeps working and working. Paulson Bruce writes, thanks, David. I'll go over this series many times. Yeah, I really encourage you guys to do that. Learning more each time. This snowballs all the other teaching in OMG. Amen. Excellent. It's been an incredible journey. Thank you for your time. You're very welcome, guys. You're very welcome, Michael and Jen. Got a 10 million from Jen. Any chance we can get a copy of the slides? Yeah, okay, I'll look to get some documentation stuff. We haven't gotten them all transcribed, but we've got several of the early ones transcribed, and I'll look to get those up. And I'll look to see what I can do about slides. I can probably put those on PDFs. They'll be in pretty raw, disorganized form to some degree, but I don't mind sticking them in a zip file and letting you get what you can from them. Thank you for giving so much, David. You're very welcome. Aaron, got a 10 million from Adrian. From Irene, too. So much to go back to re-listen and rebuild. You're very welcome, Irene. You're welcome, Chad. Another 10 million. Well, I honestly didn't realize I would get all these 10 millions. I wasn't quite. I was looking for it and not looking for it, but I didn't think about it this time. Believe it or not. So that's great. Before this webinar. Thank you, David, for creating and sharing Alchemy. Perhaps a recap in Orlando. Yeah, I'll be doing a talk in Orlando. I'm not quite sure what I'll cover, but either it'll be a recap or something, a new breakthrough. Hopefully, that I'll have that can be something additional. No, it's over. It's only a new beginning, as Michael Moynihan said. E to the 7th, that's great. That's another way to put 10 million, I believe. Matt Corlett, unless it's exponentially more than that, but either way, excellent. Matt says, thank you, everyone. Great. Thanks, David Mills, so wonderful. Yeah, thank you to everyone. Shalom, see you in Orlando. Yep, shalom, Francisco. Andres got a 10 million there. Rebecca is really only just the beginning. Absolutely, Rebecca, and thank you for your participation, all your posts in Spec Ops. Wayne says, I'm going to give you 10 million bathos. Do we avoid taxes on that? That's great. Take your time, David. By the way, something special, for sure. Thank you, David. Got her some dark chocolate covered graham crackers today, and she really liked them. Thank you, David. Things will never be the same again for us. 10 million again. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Carlos. I've got 10 million for how do we avoid taxes. That's great. Not looking for you guys to pay me that. Just had that scenario, right, with a friend. If it was the only way they can get their hands on Alchemy was to come up with 10 million, either by earning it or whatever, then would you recommend they go do that? And that's what the 10 million means. Specific scenario. 10 million for sure. Game changer, life changer. Thank you, Shema. So glad. You're very welcome, Emil. Says Alchemy has been life-changing. I'm excited about what's now possible. So glad you did this. Thank you, 10 million. Rebecca, 10 million in Bitcoin. That's tax-free. Absolutely. I'd love to have 10 million in Bitcoin. Ross says, thank you for taking the time out to teach us. Thank you, David. You're very welcome, and thank you for your energy in the beginning of all these, especially on Saturdays. I needed it. It was really helpful to have your big energy starting out the webinars. So you're very welcome, and thank you, Arnie. The mornings, for whatever reason, are a little hard. Even though they're 10 a.m., it's not like it was the crack of dawn, but it's still hard to get my energy up for those. So, okay, guys. I will see you all in some way, shape, or form soon, no question. And I'll be here. And I will see you all soon. You're very welcome. Ciao.